The woman who silenced the mafia boss in front of his men now stands between his empire and those who want her dead. But when she saves his life, everything changes. If you're ready to witness a story where silence becomes power and a librarian rewrites the rules of a criminal empire, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels across the world. The rain hammered against the library's tall windows like fists demanding entry, each gust of wind rattling the old frames in their casings. Lightning split the sky beyond the glass, illuminating rows upon rows of books that stood like silent witnesses to decades of forgotten stories. The storm had driven the last patron away hours ago, leaving only Lena Whitmore and the comfortable solitude she'd carefully constructed over 3 years of working here. She moved between the stacks with practiced quiet, her fingers trailing along spines as she reshelved returns. Fiction, history, philosophy. Each volume finding its proper place, order restored to a world that made sense within these walls. Out there, the city sprawled in chaos, sirens, shouting, the constant press of too many people wanting too many things. But here, in this nearly forgotten corner building with its high ceilings and worn wooden floors, peace existed. Lena had built her entire life around this sanctuary. At 27, she lived alone in a studio apartment 3 blocks away, walked the same route every morning, ate lunch at her desk while reading, and left precisely at 6 unless she was closing. Her coworkers at the library, all 2 of them, called her disciplined. Her mother called her scared. Lena called it survival. The world outside had taught her early that being noticed meant being hurt, so she'd learned to be invisible. Quiet voice, neutral clothes, careful movements. She kept her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, wore glasses she didn't strictly need because they created a barrier, and had perfected the art of looking busy enough that people left her alone. But not so busy, she seemed unfriendly. It had worked for years. The library suited her perfectly. Built in 1923, it had somehow escaped the city's modernization fever. While glass towers shot up around it and old neighborhoods fell to development, this building remained. Ornate ceiling moldings, original hardwood, tall windows that flooded the reading room with natural light. The city council kept threatening to close it. Budget cuts, they said. Declining patronage. Lena had heard the whispers that the building would be sold, turned into condos or office space like everything else. But for now, it stood. And for now, she could hide here. Thunder cracked overhead as she reached the history section. She was sliding a biography of Theodore Roosevelt into place when she heard it, the heavy front doors opening. The sound echoed through the main hall, followed by footsteps. Not the hesitant shuffle of someone seeking shelter from the storm, but deliberate, confident strides that announced ownership of every space they entered. Lena frowned. It was nearly 9:30. The library had been closed for 30 minutes. She'd locked those doors herself. She set down the remaining books and moved toward the main reading room, irritation flickering through her carefully maintained calm. Probably teenagers looking for a dry place to hang out. It happened occasionally. She'd politely but firmly direct them to the exit, relock the doors, finish her shelving, and go home. Simple. Controlled. Normal. The reading room stretched before her, 2 stories of books accessible by a wrought iron staircase that spiraled up to the second-floor gallery. 6 long tables occupied the center space, their surfaces scarred by decades of students and readers. The circulation desk stood to her left, and beyond it, the main entrance. 3 men stood just inside the doors, water dripping from expensive coats onto the original marble floor. They weren't teenagers. They were sharks in human skin. The 2 flanking the doors had the build and stance of professional violence, broad shoulders, watchful eyes that swept the room, cataloging exits and threats. They wore dark suits that probably cost more than Lena made in a month, and they carried themselves with the casual alertness of men who expected danger and welcomed it. But it was the 3rd man who pulled every particle of air from Lena's lungs. He stood slightly ahead of the others, phone pressed to his ear, and he commanded the space around him like gravity bending to his will. Tall, perhaps 6'2", with dark hair swept back from a face that could have been carved from marble, beautiful and cruel in equal measure. His suit was immaculate despite the rain, charcoal gray with subtle pinstripes, tailored to perfection. A heavy watch caught the light at his wrist. Everything about him screamed money and power. Everything about him screamed danger. I don't care what Petrov thinks he's owed, the man said into his phone, his voice cutting through the library's sacred quiet like a blade. He failed to deliver. He pays the price. That's how this works, Marco. Lena's heart kicked against her ribs. That voice, she knew it. Not personally, but the way everyone in this city knew certain things without being told. The way you knew which neighborhoods to avoid after dark, which streets belonged to which crews, which names you didn't say out loud if you valued your safety. Adrian Varelli, the mafia boss who controlled half the city's underground. She'd seen his photo in newspapers when he was arrested, charges that never stuck. She'd watched news reports about businesses that mysteriously burned after refusing to pay protection money. She'd heard the whispers about the man who'd built an empire on fear and violence, who made people disappear, who owned judges and cops and politicians. And he was standing in her library, dripping water on her floors, talking loud enough to wake the dead. No, I won't wait until morning, Adrian continued, pacing now, his free hand gesturing with barely contained fury. You tell him he has until midnight to make this right, or I will personally— Excuse me. The words left Lena's mouth before her brain could stop them. Quiet but firm, carrying across the reading room with the authority of someone who'd spent 3 years enforcing silence. All three men turned. Adrian's eyes found her, dark, intelligent, dangerous. And for a heartbeat that stretched into eternity, Lena felt truly seen for the first time in years. Not invisible, not background noise. Seen, measured, evaluated. Prey noticing the predator. Her legs threatened to buckle, but years of practice control kept her spine straight, her expression neutral. She was a librarian. This was her domain, and there were rules. This is a library, she said, proud that her voice didn't shake. If you need to make phone calls, you'll have to do it outside. Silence crashed down like a physical thing. The two bodyguards, because that's clearly what they were, exchanged glances that mixed shock with something that might have been amusement. One of them, a man with a scar cutting through his left eyebrow, actually smiled. Adrian Varelli did not smile. He lowered his phone slowly, deliberately, his eyes never leaving Lena's face. What did you say? Every instinct screamed at her to apologize, to run, to do anything except stand there meeting the gaze of a man who could end her with a single word. But something deeper, something that had been buried under years of making herself small and quiet and safe, refused to bend. The library is closed, Lena said, each word carefully measured. And even if it weren't, there's no talking on phones inside. It's disruptive. The scarred bodyguard coughed, definitely covering a laugh. Adrian's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Surprise? Intrigue? Anger? Lena couldn't read it, and she wasn't sure she wanted to. Do you know who I am? He asked, his voice soft now, which somehow made it more terrifying than when he'd been shouting into the phone. I know you're breaking the rules, Lena replied. It was possibly the stupidest thing she'd ever said. This man didn't follow rules. He made them. He owned half the city, commanded an army of criminals, and here she was, a nobody librarian in a dying building, telling him he was being disruptive. But she'd said it, and she wouldn't take it back. Adrian studied her for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Then slowly, deliberately, he raised his phone back to his ear. Marco, I'll call you back. He ended the call, slipped the phone into his pocket, and took 3 steps forward. His bodyguards moved with him, synchronized, professional. They stopped at the edge of the reading room, water still pooling beneath their expensive shoes. What's your name? Adrian asked. Lena's fingers curled into fists at her sides, hidden in the folds of her cardigan. The library opens at 9 tomorrow morning. You're welcome to visit during business hours. Your name, he repeated, not a question this time. You need to leave. Another moment of loaded silence. Then Adrian smiled, and it was nothing like warmth. It was the smile of a predator who'd found something unexpectedly interesting, something that might be worth playing with before the kill. Interesting, he murmured, more to himself than to her. He turned without another word and walked toward the doors. His bodyguards fell in behind him, their footsteps echoing. The scarred one glanced back at Lena, his expression somewhere between respect and pity, as if she'd done something brave and monumentally stupid in equal measure. The doors closed behind them with a heavy thud that seemed to seal Lena's fate. She stood frozen as the reading room, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat, her hands shaking now that the adrenaline had nowhere to go. What had she done? What had she just done? Adrian Varelli, the Mafia Boss, the man who made people disappear. And she'd shushed him. Lena's legs finally gave out, and she sank onto the nearest chair, pressing her palms flat against the table to ground herself. The wood was solid, real, familiar. This was still her library, still her sanctuary. She'd done the right thing, enforcing the rules, maintaining order. But the look in Adrian's eyes when he'd studied her, that hadn't been anger. It had been interest, and Lena knew, with a certainty that settled cold in her stomach, that this wasn't over. The morning came too soon and too bright. Lena woke to her alarm at 6:30, the way she did every weekday, and went through her usual routine with mechanical precision. Shower, coffee. Toast with exactly 1 tablespoon of raspberry jam. She dressed in her standard uniform, gray slacks, white blouse, navy cardigan, pulled her hair back into its neat bun, put on her glasses, became invisible again, except she didn't feel invisible as she walked to the library. She felt exposed, watched, like something fundamental had shifted in the universe, and she was the only one who could feel it. The storm had passed, leaving the city washed clean and glittering in the early light. Lena took her usual route, past the coffee shop where she never stopped because it was always too crowded, past the bodega where Mr. Chen waved at her from behind the counter, past the small park where the homeless man she secretly left sandwiches for sometimes slept on a bench. Normal. Everything was normal. Until she turned the corner onto Library Street and saw the cars. 3 black SUVs sat parked in front of the library, sleek and expensive and completely out of place in this neighborhood. Men in dark suits stood beside them, looking like they were waiting for something. Waiting for someone. Lena's steps slowed. Every fiber of her being screamed to turn around, to call in sick, to pretend yesterday had never happened. But the library keys weighed heavy in her pocket, and 3 years of rigid discipline kept her feet moving forward. She could do this. She would unlock the doors, go inside, call the police if necessary, and everything would return to normal. Except one of the men by the SUVs spotted her. He touched his ear, speaking into some kind of communications device. And suddenly all eyes were on her. "Miss Whitmore?" One of them approached, his expression professionally neutral. "Mr. Varelli would like a word." It wasn't a request. The rear door of the middle SUV opened, and Adrian Varelli stepped out into the morning light. He looked different in daylight, no less dangerous, but somehow more real. He wore another immaculate suit, this one navy, and his dark hair was still damp from a shower. He held a paper cup of what smelled like expensive coffee, and when his eyes found Lena's, that same unsettling intelligence from last night flickered in their depths. "Good morning, Miss Whitmore," he said, his voice carrying easily across the sidewalk. "Or do you prefer Ms.?" Lena stood frozen 10 feet away, her hand still buried in her pocket, clutching the library keys like a talisman. "What are you doing here?" "I've been thinking about our conversation last night," Adrian said, taking a slow sip of his coffee. "You said the library is closed after hours. You enforce the rules. I respect that." He didn't sound like he respected it. He sounded amused. "So I thought," he continued, "why not visit during proper business hours?" 9 o'clock, you said?" He checked his watch, the same heavy, expensive one from last night. "It's 8:45. I'm a little early, but I'm sure you won't mind." "The library doesn't open until 9, Lena said, forcing herself to sound calm and professional despite the terror clawing at her chest. "You'll have to wait outside." Adrian's lips curved into that predator's smile. "Of course. Rules are rules." He gestured to his men who all retreated to their vehicles. Then he leaned against the library's stone facade, crossed his arms, and waited. Lena had no choice but to walk past him to the doors. She could feel his eyes tracking her every movement, cataloging, measuring. Her hand shook as she fit the key into the lock, but she managed to turn it smoothly. The door swung open with its familiar creak. Safety. She just had to get inside and, "I bought something," Adrian said behind her. Lena turned despite herself. "What?" He pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket and held it out. "The building. I bought it. The sale went through at midnight." The world tilted sideways. Lena stared at the paper, legal documents. She could see official seals and signatures even from a distance, and felt reality crumbling beneath her feet. "That's not possible," she whispered. "The city owns this building. They've been threatening to close it, but they can't just sell it overnight. Everything is for sale, Miss Whitmore, Adrian interrupted, his voice gentle, almost kind, which made it so much worse. You just need to offer the right price to the right people. The city council was very motivated. They'll announce the sale publicly next week, but I wanted you to know first. Why? The word came out broken. Adrian stepped closer, and Lena's back hit the door. He stopped just outside her personal space, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something dark and expensive, and see the fine details of his face. A small scar above his left eyebrow, a slight crook to his nose that suggested it had been broken once, eyes that were almost black in this light. Because, he said quietly, I'm going to keep the library open. Renovate it, actually. Turn it into something the city can be proud of again. Hope flickered in Lena's chest, painful, fragile. Why would you do that? Adrian's smile widened. Let's just say I've developed an interest in literacy programs, libraries, community outreach. He paused. And the librarians who run them. The hope died as quickly as it had sparked. I want you to stay on, Adrian continued. Run the library as you see fit. I'll provide the funding for updates, new books, whatever you need. Your salary will triple. You'll have a full staff. This place will be exactly what you want it to be. It sounded perfect. It sounded like a dream. It sounded like a trap. And what do you get? Lena asked, proud of how steady her voice came out. A legitimate business holding, Adrian said simply. Community goodwill, tax benefits. And you, Miss Whitmore, enforcing the rules. The way he said it made her skin crawl. I won't help you launder money, Lena said, surprising herself with her boldness. Or hide anything illegal, or… I'm not asking you to, Adrian interrupted. I'm asking you to run a library, that's all. Be the librarian you already are. Maintain order. Enforce silence. His eyes glittered with something that might have been amusement. You're already very good at it. Lena's mind raced. This was insane. Working for the Mafia Boss? Even if he claimed the library would be legitimate, she'd be tied to him, owned by him. But if she refused… What if I say no? She asked, already knowing the answer. Adrian's expression didn't change. Then I'll hire someone else. The library will still be renovated. It will still serve the community, but it won't be yours anymore. Her sanctuary. Her safe place. The only corner of the world where she had control. Of course, Adrian continued, the new librarian might not have your particular talent for maintaining order. They might let things get loud, disruptive, chaotic. It was a threat wrapped in silk, and they both knew it. Lena looked past him to the library she'd protected for 3 years. The worn steps she'd swept countless times, the windows she'd cleaned, the doors she'd locked every night, keeping the chaos of the world at bay. She thought about losing it, about watching someone else destroy the peace she'd built, about returning to the nothing she'd been before she found this place. How long do I have to decide? She asked. I'll give you until noon, Adrian said generously. That's 3 hours. Plenty of time to think it through. He stepped back, giving her space she desperately needed. I'll be back at 12. We can discuss the details then. Without waiting for a response, he walked to his SUV. The door closed with a heavy thunk, and moments later the convoy pulled away from the curb, disappearing into morning traffic. Lena stood alone on the library steps, the keys still clutched in her hand, and felt the careful walls she'd built around her life beginning to crack.
It does check.
She tried to work. Lena went through the motions of her morning routine, turning on lights, starting the computers, checking the Dropbox for returns. The library's other employee, Mrs. Chen, no relation to the bodega owner, arrived at 9:15 and immediately noticed something was wrong. You look pale, the older woman said, concern creasing her weathered face. Are you feeling all right? Fine, Lena lied. Just tired. She couldn't tell Mrs. Chen the truth. Couldn't say that the Mafia Boss had bought their workplace and was giving her 3 hours to decide whether to work for him or lose everything she'd built. The morning dragged by with excruciating slowness. The usual patrons came and went, the university student who always sat in the same corner, the elderly man who read newspapers for hours, the young mother whose toddler loved the picture books. Normal people living normal lives, completely unaware that their library now belonged to a criminal empire. Lena tried to imagine telling them, tried to picture their faces when they learned the truth. She couldn't do it. At 11:30, she finally admitted defeat. She couldn't decide this alone. She pulled out her cell phone and dialed her mother's number, fingers trembling. 3 rings, then, "Lena? Honey, what's wrong? You never call during work hours." Just hearing her mother's voice made Lena's eyes burn. They didn't have an easy relationship. They were too different, wanted two different things, but right now she desperately needed someone who knew her, really knew her. "Mom," she said quietly, turning her back to the circulation desk so Mrs. Chen wouldn't overhear. "If you had to choose between doing something you knew was wrong or losing everything you'd worked for, what would you do?" Silence on the other end. Then, "What happened?" "Just hypothetically, Lena Marie Whitmore, you are the worst liar I've ever met. What's going on?" Lena closed her eyes. "Someone bought the library. They want me to stay on and run it, but I don't trust them. I don't know what they really want from me." More silence, longer this time. When her mother spoke again, her voice was softer. "Is it legal, what they're asking you to do?" "They say it is. Do you believe them?" That was the question, wasn't it? Did she believe Adrian Varelli when he said he just wanted her to run a library? When he claimed it would be legitimate? "I don't know," Lena admitted. "Then you have to decide what you can live with," her mother said gently. "I know you love that library, sweetheart. I know it means everything to you. But is it worth compromising who you are?" Who was she? Lena had spent so long making herself small and invisible that she wasn't sure anymore. "I don't know," she repeated, the words barely a whisper. "That's okay," her mother said. "You don't have to know right now. But Lena, whatever you decide, I'm proud of you. You've built something beautiful there. Don't let anyone take that from you, not even yourself." They talked for a few more minutes before hanging up, and Lena felt marginally steadier. Not better, not certain, but at least grounded enough to think. She had 20 minutes left. At 11:55, the black SUVs returned. Lena watched through the window as they parked in the same spot as before, and her heart sank. She'd spent 3 hours agonizing over this decision and still didn't have an answer. But when Adrian Varelli walked through the library doors at precisely noon, flanked by his 2 bodyguards, she found the words coming anyway. "I need conditions," she said before he could speak. Adrian's eyebrows rose slightly. "Conditions? If I'm going to work for you, if I'm going to help you run this library, then I need guarantees." "Such as?" He sounded genuinely curious. Lena took a breath, steadying herself. "First, everything about the library operations stays legal. No money laundering, no hiding criminals, no using this place for anything illegal." "Agreed." "Second, I have complete control over library policies and programming. You don't interfere with how I run it." "Within reason," Adrian countered. "I'm not going to micromanage you, Miss Whitmore, but I retain ownership. Final say on major decisions remains mine." It wasn't perfect, but it was probably the best she'd get. "Fine. Third, and this is non-negotiable, the library stays open to the public. Anyone can use it. You don't ban people. You don't turn it into some private club for your associates." "Agreed," Adrian said immediately. "That's the whole point. Community goodwill, remember?" "Fourth," Lena continued, surprised at her own boldness, "Mrs. Chen keeps her job. And she gets a raise too." At the circulation desk, Mrs. Chen looked up sharply, clearly having been eavesdropping despite her best efforts to seem busy. Adrian's lips quirked. "Done. Anything else?" "Yes." Lena met his eyes directly. "If I ever find out you're using me or this library for something illegal, I walk, and I go straight to the police with whatever I know." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Adrian's bodyguards tensed, their hands moving toward weapons Lena couldn't see but knew they carried. Adrian himself went very still, his expression unreadable. "That," he said quietly, "sounds like a threat, Miss Whitmore." "It's a boundary," Lena corrected, her voice shaking but determined. "You want me to work for you? Fine, but I won't be complicit in anything that hurts people. Those are my terms." The silence stretched so long that Lena was certain she'd just signed her own death warrant. This was how people who crossed the Mafia Boss ended up. Bodies in rivers, mysterious accidents, disappearances that were never solved. Then Adrian laughed. It was genuine, surprised, the sound of someone who'd been genuinely caught off guard. He shook his head, still smiling. "You are the most interesting person I've met in years," he said. "All right, Miss Whitmore, I accept your conditions. Run your library. Maintain your integrity. And yes, if you ever discover I'm using this place for something illegal, you can walk." He extended his hand. "Do we have a deal?" Lena stared at that offered hand like it was a snake. Taking it meant binding herself to a man who controlled half the city's criminal empire. It meant stepping out of the shadows she'd hidden in for years. It meant risk and danger and everything she'd spent her life avoiding. But it also meant keeping her library, her sanctuary, her small piece of the world where she had power. She reached out and shook his hand. His grip was firm, warm, and sent electricity racing up her arm. "Excellent," Adrian said, releasing her hand. "I'll have my lawyers draw up a formal contract. In the meantime, I'm assigning some security to the building." "Security?" Lena echoed. "This is a valuable property now," Adrian said smoothly. "It would be irresponsible not to protect it. Don't worry, they'll be discreet. You won't even notice them." Before Lena could argue, he was moving toward the door, but he paused at the threshold, glancing back with that unsettling smile. "Oh, and Miss Whitmore? I appreciate you enforcing the rules last night. That took courage." His eyes glittered. "I hope you maintain that same spirit. Things are going to get very interesting around here." Then he was gone, his bodyguards following, leaving Lena standing in the middle of her library, her prison, her sanctuary, her new reality. Mrs. Chen appeared at her elbow. "Did that man just say he bought the library?" "Yes," Lena said faintly. "And you're still working here?" "Yes." "Did he really say I get a raise?" "Yes." Mrs. Chen considered this for a moment. Then she shrugged. "Well, at least the roof might finally get fixed." She returned to the circulation desk, leaving Lena alone with her spiraling thoughts. What had she just done? What had she just agreed to? The answer came 2 hours later when the security arrived. They showed up at 2:30, 4 men in suits who looked like they could break bones without breaking a sweat. They introduced themselves politely, professionally, and immediately began positioning themselves around the library's perimeter. One stationed himself by the front doors. Another took up residence near the emergency exit. The third moved to the second-floor gallery, where he had a clear view of everything below. The fourth simply wandered, patrolling with the casual alertness of a predator marking territory. The patrons noticed. The university student packed up early, practically running for the exit. The elderly newspaper reader kept glancing nervously at the guard by the door. The young mother with the toddler took one look at the situation and decided story time was over. Within an hour, the library was empty except for Lena, Mrs. Chen, and the 4 men who transformed her sanctuary into something that felt more like a fortress or a trap. Lena tried to approach the one by the front door, a broad-shouldered man with close-cropped hair and cold eyes. "Excuse me," she said, using her librarian voice. "You're making the patrons uncomfortable. If you could maybe be less visible?" "Mr. Varelli's orders, ma'am," the guard replied without looking at her. "We're here for security. That means being visible enough to deter threats." "Threats?" Lena repeated. "This is a library. What threats?" "You'd be surprised, ma'am." That was all he would say. Lena returned to the circulation desk, fighting the urge to scream. This wasn't what she'd agreed to. She'd said yes to running a library, not turning it into an armed compound. She pulled out her phone and found Adrian's number. He'd given it to her before leaving, in case you need anything, and stared at it. "Don't call him," her rational mind warned. "Don't make yourself more visible than you already are." But the library was dying around her, driven away by men with guns, and she'd agreed to preserve it, to protect it, to keep it open. She dialed. He answered on the first ring. "Miss Whitmore, I was wondering when you'd call." "Your security is destroying my library," Lena said without preamble. "All my patrons left. They're too scared to come in with armed men everywhere." "They're not armed," Adrian said mildly. "Not visibly, anyway. That's not the point. The point," he interrupted, his voice going hard, "is that you're now connected to me. Anyone who wants to hurt me will look for pressure points, weak spots, and a quiet librarian running a newly acquired library is exactly the kind of soft target they'd love." The words hit Lena like ice water. You said I'd just be running a library. You are. I'm just making sure you survive to do it. His tone softened slightly. Give it a week, Miss Whitmore. Let people get used to seeing security around. They'll adjust. You'll see. And if they don't? Then we'll revisit the arrangement. But I think you'll be surprised how quickly normal returns. He paused. Have a good afternoon, Miss Whitmore. Try not to worry so much. He hung up before she could respond. Lena stood there, phone in hand, and felt the full weight of her decision settling onto her shoulders. She'd made a deal with the Mafia Boss, and there was no going back now. The first week was hell. True to Adrian's word, the library stayed open. The security remained, though after Lena's fourth phone call complaining about them, they at least tried to look less intimidating. They wore blazers instead of suits, smiled occasionally, and one of them even helped an elderly woman carry her books to her car. But everyone knew what they were. Patron numbers dropped by 60%. The regulars stopped coming. The library that had been Lena's sanctuary became a ghost town haunted by armed shadows. She threw herself into work with desperate energy. Organized the shelves, updated the catalog system, created new program proposals. Anything to distract from the fact that she'd destroyed everything she'd tried to protect. Mrs. Chen tried to help, bless her. She brought in homemade soup and kind words, but even she couldn't disguise the concern in her eyes when she looked at Lena. You look thinner, she said on Friday afternoon, the 5th day of the new arrangement. Are you eating? I'm fine, Lena lied. She wasn't fine. She was trapped in a nightmare of her own making, watching her sanctuary die around her, and she had no idea how to fix it. Then, on Saturday morning, everything changed again. Lena arrived at 8 to open up. She'd taken to coming in early just to have time alone before the security arrived, and found Adrian Varelli's car already parked outside. He stood on the library steps, dressed more casually than she'd seen him before. Dark jeans, a black Henley, leather jacket. He looked younger like this, less like a crime lord and more like a dangerous man who just happened to own half the city. Good morning, he said as she approached. I thought we should talk. About what? Lena asked warily. About why you look like you haven't slept in a week. Adrian gestured to the library. May I? It wasn't really a question. He owned the building now. Lena unlocked the doors and let him inside. The familiar smell of old books and wood polish greeted them, and for a moment she could pretend everything was normal. Coffee? Adrian asked, producing 2 paper cups from somewhere. I took a guess at your order. Vanilla latte. 1 sugar? Lena stared at the offered cup. How did you know that? I pay attention, Miss Whitmore. He handed her the coffee and took a sip of his own. Now, tell me what's really bothering you. What's bothering me, Lena said, anger finally breaking through her careful control, is that you've turned my library into a fortress. The patrons are gone. The programs are canceled. Everything I worked for is dying, and you're drinking coffee like it doesn't matter. Adrian set his cup down on the circulation desk and studied her with those 2 intelligent eyes. You're right, he said finally. I miscalculated. Lena blinked. What? I assumed visible security would be enough to protect you and the library, Adrian continued. I didn't consider how it would affect the community's perception of this place. That was a mistake. Was he apologizing? I'll pull the visible security, Adrian said. Replace them with something less obvious. Plainclothes surveillance, cameras, that sort of thing. Give your patrons a reason to come back. Relief flooded through Lena so intensely she had to grip the desk for balance. Really? Really. Adrian picked up his coffee again. But I want something in return. And there it was, the catch, the real reason he was here. What? Lena asked, bracing herself. Adrian smiled that predator's smile. Teach me. Teach you what? To read, he said simply. The world stopped. Lena stared at the Mafia Boss, the man who controlled an empire, who commanded armies of criminals, who struck fear into everyone who heard his name, and tried to process what he'd just said. You can't read? She asked carefully. I can read, Adrian corrected. I'm just not good at it. Dyslexia, they called it when I was a kid. School wasn't exactly a priority in my family, and by the time I realized it mattered, I was already... He gestured vaguely, busy with other things. You want me to teach you to read? Lena repeated, still not quite believing it. I want you to help me get better at it, Adrian said. I can handle numbers fine, business documents, contracts. But actual books? Literature? I struggle. It takes me forever, and half the time I'm not sure I'm understanding it right. He met her eyes directly, and for the first time Lena saw something vulnerable in his expression. You're a librarian, he continued. You understand books, words, how to make sense of them. Help me do the same. Why? Lena asked. Why does it matter? You obviously run your empire just fine without... Because I'm tired of feeling stupid, Adrian interrupted, his voice hard. I'm tired of having people read things to me. I'm tired of pretending I don't care about books, when the truth is I've always wished I could just sit down and read like normal people do. The honesty in his words shocked Lena into silence. This wasn't a mafia boss asking for help. This was a man admitting to a weakness, showing her something real and raw and human. If I do this, Lena said slowly, the security really goes? It gets less visible, Adrian promised. You'll still be protected, but your patrons won't know it. The library goes back to normal. And you come here for lessons? Late evenings, after closing. Once, maybe twice a week. An hour each time, that's all I'm asking. Lena's mind raced. This was insane. Teaching the mafia boss to read? Spending time alone with him? But if it meant saving her library. Okay, she heard herself say. But we do this my way. You follow my lesson plans, you do the homework, and you don't intimidate me or try to control how I teach. Adrian's smile widened. Deal. He extended his hand again, and again Lena shook it. Mondays and Thursdays, she said. 7 to 8, bring a notebook. Yes, ma'am, Adrian said, and the amusement in his voice made her want to hit him. Instead, she picked up her coffee and took a sip. Vanilla latte, 1 sugar. Perfect. True to his word, the visible security disappeared by Monday. In its place came subtlety, cameras Lena only noticed because she was looking for them. The occasional unfamiliar face that lingered too long in the stacks before leaving, a black sedan that was always parked across the street. But to the patrons, the library was just a library again. They started trickling back, slowly at first, then in greater numbers. The university student reclaimed his corner. The elderly newspaper reader returned to his table. The young mother brought her toddler for story time. By Wednesday, circulation numbers were almost back to normal. By Thursday, Lena had almost convinced herself that she could make this work, that she could maintain her boundaries, keep the library safe, and navigate this impossible situation. Then Thursday evening came. Lena locked the doors at 6, said goodnight to Mrs. Chen, and began the familiar closing routine, straightening chairs, shutting down computers, checking the drop box. At precisely 7 o'clock, someone knocked. Adrian Varelli stood outside the glass doors, a leather messenger bag slung over his shoulder, looking for all the world like a regular student coming for a tutoring session. Except he was the mafia boss. And Lena had just agreed to be alone with him. She unlocked the door. Come in, she said, proud of how steady her voice was. Adrian stepped inside and Lena locked the door behind him. Where do you want to work? He asked. Lena gestured to one of the reading tables. Here is fine. They sat across from each other, the polished wood between them like a battlefield. Adrian pulled a notebook from his bag, expensive leather, probably cost more than Lena made in a week, and set it on the table along with an equally expensive pen. So, he said, how do we start? Lena took a breath. This was her domain, her expertise. She could do this. First, she said, I need to understand where you're at, what you can do, what you struggle with. She pulled a book from the stack she'd prepared, a contemporary novel, popular but not overly complex. Read this paragraph for me, out loud. Adrian took the book, his expression unreadable. Then he began to read. His voice was halting, uncertain in a way that completely contradicted the confidence he carried everywhere else. He stumbled over words, backtracked, corrected himself. Simple words came easier, but longer ones made him pause, sounding them out syllable by syllable. Lena listened, making mental notes. He wasn't lying. He really did struggle. But he was also trying, genuinely trying, and something about that vulnerability made her chest tighten. Okay, she said when he finished. That's a good start. I can work with this. Adrian looked up, and the relief in his eyes was unmistakable. Yeah? Yeah. Lena pulled out her lesson plan. We're going to focus on fluency and comprehension. I'll give you passages to practice, techniques to help with the dyslexia, and we'll build from there. They worked for the full hour, Lena guiding him through exercises with the same patience she used for the children's literacy program. Adrian was a quick study when he wasn't fighting his own brain, and she found herself actually enjoying the teaching. At 8, she called time. That's enough for tonight, she said. Practice the passages I marked. We'll review Monday. Adrian gathered his things, but he didn't stand immediately. Instead, he studied her with that intense gaze that made her feel transparent. Thank you, he said quietly. Don't thank me yet, Lena replied. You haven't done the homework. Not for the lesson. Adrian stood, slinging his bag over his shoulder. For not making me feel like an idiot. For treating this like it matters. It does matter, Lena said simply. Reading matters. Words matter. Adrian smiled. Not the predator's smile this time, but something softer. See you Monday, Miss Whitmore. See you Monday. She walked him to the door, unlocked it, and watched him disappear into the night. Then she locked up again and stood in the quiet library, surrounded by books and silence. What was she doing? Teaching the Mafia Boss to read? Working for a criminal? Letting herself believe that maybe, just maybe, this could work. Lena pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the door and closed her eyes. Outside, the black sedan was still parked across the street. Inside, her sanctuary felt less like a prison and more like something else entirely. Something dangerous. Something that might consume her if she wasn't careful. But as she turned off the lights and headed home through the dark city streets, Lena couldn't help thinking about the relief in Adrian's eyes when she'd said she could help him. About the way his voice had steadied as the hour went on. About how for 60 minutes he hadn't been the Mafia Boss. He'd just been a man trying to learn. And somehow, that terrified her more than all the rest. The following Monday brought autumn rain that turned the city streets into rivers of reflected neon. Lena stood at the library's tall windows, watching water cascade down the glass, and tried to ignore the nervous energy thrumming through her veins. 7 o'clock approached with relentless certainty. Mrs. Chen had left an hour ago, casting knowing glances that Lena pretended not to notice. The older woman had figured out the pattern quickly enough. The Mafia Boss arriving every Monday and Thursday evening, staying exactly 1 hour, leaving with that leather messenger bag slung over his shoulder. She hadn't asked questions, which Lena appreciated. Some things were better left unspoken. The library felt different in the evenings. Shadows gathered in corners that daylight never quite reached. The usual sounds of pages turning and quiet footsteps were replaced by the building's own breathing, the creak of old wood settling, the whisper of air through ancient vents, the distant hum of the heating system struggling against the cold. Lena had set up their usual table, placing the materials she'd prepared throughout the day. This week's focus was on comprehension strategies, techniques to help Adrian retain what he read instead of just struggling through the words. She'd selected passages carefully, choosing topics she thought might interest him while avoiding anything too complex. At 6:58, headlights swept across the windows. Her heart kicked against her ribs, and she hated herself for the reaction. This was just another tutoring session. She'd taught dozens of people to read better over the years. The fact that this particular student could order someone's death with a phone call shouldn't matter, except it did. Adrian's knock came precisely at 7, 3 sharp raps that somehow conveyed both courtesy and authority. Lena crossed to the door, her reflection ghost-like in the dark glass, and unlocked it. He stepped inside, bringing the smell of rain and expensive cologne. Water darkened his hair and beaded on his leather jacket. He looked tired, she noticed. Fine lines bracketed his eyes, and there was a tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there last session. Rough day? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Adrian's eyebrows rose slightly. You could say that. There was a disagreement with a business partner, nothing that concerns you. But the way he said it made Lena's stomach tighten. A disagreement in Adrian's world probably meant violence, maybe death. And here she was, about to spend an hour teaching him to read like none of that mattered. Coffee? She asked instead, gesturing to the 2 cups she'd prepared. She'd started making them herself, refusing to let him bring them anymore. It felt too personal, too much like he was taking care of her when the power dynamic was already so skewed. Please. Adrian shrugged out of his jacket and draped it over a chair. Underneath, he wore a simple black sweater that made him look less like a crime lord and more like a dangerously handsome man who just happened to be in her library. They settled into their usual positions across the table. Adrian pulled out his notebook, the pages now filled with his homework from the previous week. His handwriting was surprisingly neat, careful in the way of someone who'd had to work hard for every skill. "Did you practice the passages?" Lena asked, falling into the familiar rhythm of their sessions. "Every night." Adrian flipped to a marked page. "I timed myself like you said, getting faster." He was. Over the past 3 weeks, Lena had watched his reading speed improve noticeably. He still stumbled over longer words, still had to reread sentences occasionally, but the raw panic that had flickered in his eyes during that first session was gone now. "Good. Tonight we're going to focus on retention." Lena pushed a printout across the table. "Read this article. It's about urban development planning, and then tell me what you remember. Don't worry about getting every detail. I want to know what stuck." Adrian took the pages and began reading, his lips moving slightly as he worked through the text. Lena watched him without seeming to, noting the furrow between his brows when he concentrated, the way his finger traced lines when the words got dense, the small exhale of satisfaction when he finished a paragraph. He was utterly focused, completely absorbed in the task. This was the version of Adrian Varelli that no one else saw, vulnerable, uncertain, trying. Something in Lena's chest softened despite her best efforts to maintain professional distance. "Okay," Adrian said after several minutes. "It's about rezoning in industrial districts. The city wants to convert old factories into mixed-use spaces, apartments, retail, offices. There are concerns about displacement of existing communities and whether the infrastructure can support increased population density. The author argues for a balanced approach that includes affordable housing requirements and community input." He looked up, waiting for her assessment. Lena blinked. "That was perfect. You got all the main points." "Yeah?" Adrian's smile was genuine, pleased. "I tried what you taught me last week, reading with questions in mind, looking for the thesis statement, that stuff." "It's working." Lena couldn't help but smile back. "You're a quick learner when you're not fighting yourself." "I had a good teacher." The compliment hung between them, warm and unexpected. Lena felt heat creep into her cheeks and busied herself with her notes to hide it. "Let's try something harder," she said. "Fiction this time. It requires a different kind of comprehension, emotional context, character motivation, subtext." She handed him a short story she'd selected, a literary piece about a man trying to reconcile with his estranged daughter. It was beautifully written, complex in its emotional landscape, and she watched Adrian's expression shift as he read. His brow furrowed deeper. He backtracked more frequently. Once, his jaw clenched, and she wondered if something in the text had struck a nerve. When he finished, he set the pages down carefully and was quiet for a long moment. "Well?" Lena prompted gently. "What did you think?" "The father's an idiot," Adrian said bluntly. "He keeps saying he wants to fix things, but he doesn't actually change anything. He just expects her to forgive him because he showed up." "And why doesn't that work?" "Because showing up isn't enough. You can't undo years of damage with one conversation." Adrian's voice had gone hard. "He abandoned her when she needed him. Now he wants absolution without earning it. That's not how this works." Lena studied him carefully. "Sounds personal." Adrian's eyes snapped to hers, sharp and defensive. Then, slowly, his expression softened. "My father left when I was 8, came back when I was 16 after I'd already—" He stopped, seeming to reconsider his words. "After I'd already made certain choices. He wanted to play dad again. I told him to go to hell." It was the most personal thing he'd shared with her, and Lena felt the weight of the trust it represented. "Do you regret it?" she asked quietly. "No." Adrian's answer was immediate. "You don't get to walk away from your responsibilities and then waltz back in when it's convenient. Actions have consequences. He taught me that, even if he didn't mean to." Lena thought about her own father, who died when she was 12, who'd never had the chance to walk away or come back, who existed now only in photographs and fading memories. "I think," she said carefully, "that the story is about whether people can change, whether forgiveness is possible even when the hurt runs deep." "And what do you think?" Adrian asked. "Is it?" I think it depends on whether the change is real or just convenient. Lena met his gaze directly. And whether the person being asked to forgive has anything left to give. Something shifted in Adrian's expression. Understanding, maybe, or recognition. Fair enough. They moved on to other exercises, but the conversation lingered in the air between them. By the time 8 o'clock arrived, Lena felt exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with teaching. Adrian packed his things slowly, as if reluctant to leave. Same time Thursday? Same time Thursday, Lena confirmed. He paused at the door, turning back to face her. Can I ask you something? Warning bells chimed in Lena's mind, but she nodded. Why are you so afraid of being seen? The question hit like a physical blow. Lena's breath caught, her carefully constructed composure cracking. What? You hide, Adrian said simply. The way you dress, the way you move, the way you talk to people. You make yourself invisible. Why? Lena wanted to deny it, to deflect with the librarian's professional courtesy, but Adrian's eyes saw too much, and she was suddenly tired of pretending. Because being invisible is safe, she said quietly. Nobody hurts what they don't notice. And nobody loves it either. The words landed soft but devastating. Lena felt them settle into her chest like stones. I should lock up, she said, not quite meeting his eyes. Adrian studied her for another moment, then nodded. Good night, Miss Whitmore. Good night. She watched him disappear into the rain, then locked the door and leaned against it, her heart hammering. Nobody loves it either. The words echoed in her mind, true and terrible. When had she stopped wanting to be loved? When had safety become more important than connection? Lena didn't have answers. She turned off the lights and headed home through streets slick with rain, feeling like something fundamental had shifted in the careful balance she'd maintained. Thursday's session came too quickly and felt different from the start. Adrian arrived exactly on time but seemed distracted, checking his phone twice during the first 15 minutes, something he'd never done before. Sorry, he said, putting it away after the second glance. Waiting on news about a situation. We can reschedule if you need to deal with it, Lena offered. No. Adrian's response was firm. I'm here. Let's work. But his concentration was fractured. He stumbled over passages he could have handled easily last week. His answers to comprehension questions were shallow, rushed. After the third time he had to reread the same paragraph, Lena closed her notebook. What's going on? Adrian looked up, surprised. What do you mean? You're barely here. Your mind is somewhere else. Lena kept her voice gentle but direct. If something's wrong, nothing's wrong. Too quick, too defensive. Adrian. His name felt strange on her tongue. She'd been careful to use Mr. Virelli during their sessions, maintaining professional distance. But right now, he needed someone to see him, not his title. Talk to me. He was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working. Then, there's a territorial dispute. Another family moving into areas that have been mine for years. They hit one of my warehouses last night, killed 2 of my people. Lena's blood ran cold. And you're planning to retaliate. It wasn't a question. It's what's expected, Adrian said flatly. Show weakness, and the whole empire crumbles. Everyone starts thinking they can take what's mine. So you'll kill more people, and they'll kill more of yours, and it just keeps going. That's the business. It's not business, Lena said, anger surprising her with its intensity. It's murder. Adrian's eyes went hard. Don't lecture me about morality, Miss Whitmore. You don't know what world I live in, the rules that govern it. I know that you're sitting here learning to read when you should be planning violence. I know that somewhere in you, there's a person who wants to be more than just a killer. Lena leaned forward. What happens if you don't retaliate? What if you find another way? There is no other way. There's always another way. Not in my world. They stared at each other across the table, the air thick with tension. Lena could see the conflict in Adrian's eyes. The man who wanted to change warring with the mafia boss who couldn't afford to. You asked me why I hide, Lena said quietly. It's because I've seen what happens when people fight. My mother was married before my father. Her first husband was violent. He'd come home angry and take it out on her. She hid for years, made herself small, hoped if she was invisible enough, he'd leave her alone. What happened? Adrian asked, his voice rough. She finally fought back, hit him with a lamp when he went after her one night. He fell, cracked his head on the corner of a table. Lena's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the table. He died. She spent 2 years in prison for manslaughter, even though it was self-defense. I was 4. I barely remember her from that time. Understanding dawned in Adrian's expression. That's why you hide. You learned that fighting back has consequences. Fighting always has consequences, Lena said. The question is whether you can live with them. Adrian was quiet for a long time. Then he pulled out his phone and made a call. Marco, it's me. About the retaliation. Hold off. No, I'm not going soft. I'm being smart. Set up a meeting with the other family. Neutral ground. Tell them I want to negotiate territory boundaries instead of starting a war. He paused, listening. I don't care what they'll think. Do it. He ended the call and looked at Lena. There. No killing tonight. Happy? Lena's heart was racing. You didn't have to do that. Yeah, I did. Adrian's smile was wry. Because you're right. I don't want to just be a killer. I've been that long enough. Something passed between them in that moment. Recognition, connection, the fragile beginning of trust. Lena felt it settle into her bones, terrifying and exhilarating. Should we get back to the lesson? She asked, her voice not quite steady. Yeah, let's do that. They worked for the remaining 40 minutes with renewed focus. Adrian's concentration returned, and by the end of the session, they'd made real progress. When 8 o'clock came, he lingered at the door again. Thank you, he said, for calling me on my bullshit. Someone has to, Lena replied. Most people are too afraid. I'm terrified. I'm just tired of letting fear run my life. Adrian's smile was genuine this time, reaching his eyes. Good. Fear is useful, but it's a terrible master. After he left, Lena sat alone in the quiet library and realized that something had fundamentally changed between them. They weren't just tutor and student anymore. They were two people who'd shown each other their wounds and hadn't looked away. It was dangerous. It was real. And Lena had no idea what to do with it. The next week, Adrian arrived on Monday with news. The meeting with the other family went well. We established clear boundaries. No bloodshed necessary. I'm glad, Lena said, and meant it. So am I. Adrian set his bag down. Turns out negotiation is more profitable than war. Who knew? They fell into their lesson, but there was an ease between them now that hadn't existed before. Adrian was more willing to ask questions, to admit when he didn't understand something. Lena found herself sharing more too. Stories about library patrons, frustrations with bureaucracy, small glimpses into her carefully guarded life. During their Thursday session, Adrian brought a book he'd bought. I want to try reading this. For pleasure, not just practice. Lena took it, surprised. It was a thriller, fast-paced and popular. This is pretty advanced. Long chapters, complex plot. I know, but it's the kind of book I've always wanted to read. Adrian looked almost embarrassed. I see people on the subway reading, getting lost in stories. I want to know what that feels like. Something in Lena's chest cracked open. Okay, let's build up to it. We'll work on sustained reading stamina, strategies for tracking multiple plot threads. They spent the session breaking down the first chapter, Adrian reading aloud while Lena guided him through the complex narrative. His voice grew more confident as he went, the words flowing smoother. When they finished, his eyes were bright. I actually followed that. The whole thing. You did. Lena couldn't help but smile at his obvious joy. Keep practicing. By the time we finish working through this, you'll be able to read the rest on your own. Will you still meet with me, even after I don't need the lessons anymore? The question caught Lena off guard. Why would you want to? Adrian met her eyes directly. Because these sessions are the only time I get to just be a person. Not the boss, not the enforcer, not the guy everyone's afraid of. Just someone learning something new. Lena's breath caught. Adrian, you don't have to answer now, he said quickly. Just think about it. She did think about it. All week, between helping patrons and organizing programs and maintaining the careful fiction that everything was normal, Lena thought about what it meant that the Mafia Boss wanted to keep spending time with her. She thought about the way he looked at her, like she was someone worth seeing. She thought about how she'd started looking forward to Monday and Thursday evenings. She thought about how dangerous all of this was becoming. Friday afternoon brought the danger home in a way she couldn't ignore. Lena was reshelving returns when the library doors opened and 4 men walked in. They weren't Adrian's people. She'd learned to recognize his security by now. These men were different, harder, wrong. The lead man was tall and broad, with a shaved head and cold eyes. He approached the circulation desk where Mrs. Chen sat, his companions spreading out to block the exits. "We're looking for someone," the man said, his accent thick. Russian, maybe. "Librarian named Whitmore." Lena's heart stopped. Mrs. Chen's eyes went wide, but the older woman had survived 60 years in this city by being smart. "I'll get her. One moment." She hurried to where Lena stood frozen between the stacks. "Run," Mrs. Chen whispered urgently. "Back exit, now!" But before Lena could move, the lead man called out, "No running, Miss Whitmore? We just want to talk." Lena stepped into view, her legs shaking but her voice steady. "The library is a public space. If you're not here to read or study, you need to leave." The man smiled, and it was nothing like warmth. "We're here to deliver a message from Viktor Petrov." The name meant nothing to Lena, but she saw Mrs. Chen go pale. "I don't know anyone named Viktor Petrov," Lena said, "but your employer does. Adrian Varelli took something that belongs to Mr. Petrov. We're here to remind him that actions have consequences." The man took a step closer. "You tell Varelli that if he doesn't return what he took, we'll start taking what he values, starting with his pretty librarian." Terror flooded Lena's system, but years of hiding had taught her to control her expression. "I'm not his anything. I just work here." "You spend every Monday and Thursday evening alone with him. Our sources say he's very protective of this library, of you." The man's smile widened. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to call Varelli right now and tell him we were here. Tell him he has 48 hours to return the shipment he intercepted. Or next time we visit, we won't be so polite." One of the other men pulled out a gun, not pointing it at anyone, just letting it be seen. Several patrons who'd been pretending to browse suddenly remembered they had somewhere else to be. Within seconds, the library was empty except for Lena, Mrs. Chen, and the 4 intruders. "Make the call," the lead man ordered. Lena's hands were shaking as she pulled out her phone. She found Adrian's number and pressed call, her mind racing. This was what she'd feared from the beginning, being pulled into Adrian's world, becoming a target, a tool, a weapon against him. Adrian answered on the first ring. "Lena? What's wrong?" The sound of her first name in his voice sent a jolt through her. "There are men here. They say they're from Viktor Petrov. They want you to return something you took." A pause. Then Adrian's voice went deadly cold. "Put him on." Lena handed the phone to the lead man, who took it with a satisfied smirk. "Varelli, good to finally speak." A pause while he listened. "That's right. Your librarian is very cooperative. It would be a shame if anything happened to her." Another pause, longer. The man's smirk faded. "You do that. But remember, 48 hours. After that, all bets are off." He handed the phone back to Lena and gestured to his men. "We're done here, for now." They left as casually as they'd entered, and Lena stood frozen until she heard their car drive away. Then her legs gave out, and she sank into the nearest chair. "Lena!" Mrs. Chen rushed over, gripping her shoulders. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Lena managed, even though she was very much not fine. Adrian's voice came through the phone, urgent. "Lena, are you hurt? Did they touch you?" "No, they just talked, threatened. They had a gun." "I'm sending people there now. Stay inside. Don't go anywhere. I'm on my way." "Adrian, wait." But he'd already hung up. Within 10 minutes, the library was surrounded by Adrian's security. Within 20, the man himself strode through the doors, his expression thunderous. He went straight to Lena, his hands gripping her arms, his eyes scanning her face for injuries. "Are you hurt?" he demanded. "No, I'm fine. They didn't—" Adrian pulled her into his arms, crushing her against his chest. Lena froze, shocked by the embrace, by the desperate relief she could feel radiating from him. "They threatened you," he said into her hair. "They came into your library and threatened you because of me." Lena's hands came up slowly, resting against his back. He was warm and solid, and she could feel his heart hammering. I'm okay. Adrian, I'm okay. He pulled back but kept his hands on her shoulders. This is my fault. I put you in danger. I should have anticipated Petrov would try something like this. Who is Viktor Petrov? Russian mob. We've been competing for control of the port shipping routes. I intercepted one of his weapons shipments last month. Sold it to a buyer in Miami before he could. Adrian's jaw clenched. I knew he'd retaliate, but I thought he'd come after me or my operations. Not you. I'm a soft target, Lena said quietly, remembering what Adrian had told her weeks ago. Like you said. Adrian's eyes darkened with something that might have been guilt or rage, or both. I'm going to fix this. I'm going to make sure Petrov never comes near you again. How? I'll give him what he wants. The shipment's already sold, but I'll compensate him. Double what it was worth. Make it clear that you're off limits. And if that doesn't work, Adrian's smile was cold and sharp as a blade, then I'll remind him why people fear the Virelli name. Violence. Always violence. Lena pulled away from his grip, wrapping her arms around herself. This is exactly what I was afraid of. Being pulled into your world, becoming a pawn in your wars. You're not a pawn. Adrian's voice was fierce. He stopped, seeming to catch himself. What? Lena demanded. What am I? Adrian looked at her for a long moment, something vulnerable flickering in his eyes. You're someone I care about, someone I don't want to see hurt. The words hit Lena like a freight train. Care about. Not just a tutor, not just the librarian who worked in his building, someone he cared about. I can't do this, she whispered. I can't be the reason people get hurt. I can't be part of your world. Then what do you want? Adrian asked, frustrated. You want me to walk away? Sell the library back to the city? Pretend these last 2 months never happened? Did she? Lena tried to imagine Monday evenings without Adrian sitting across from her, working through passages with fierce concentration. Tried to imagine not seeing that smile when he successfully finished a difficult chapter. Tried to imagine going back to her invisible life where no one really saw her. The thought made her chest ache. I don't know what I want, she admitted, but I know I'm scared. I know that whatever this is between us, it's dangerous, and I've spent my whole life trying to avoid danger. Maybe it's time to stop hiding, Adrian said quietly. Maybe it's time to fight for something instead of just surviving. Lena met his eyes and saw her own fear reflected back at her. He was scared too, she realized. Scared of caring about someone in his brutal world. Scared of what it meant that he'd started choosing negotiation over violence, reading over retaliation, connection over isolation. They were both terrified, and somehow that made it real. I need time, Lena said finally. I need to think about all of this, about what it means, what I'm willing to risk. Adrian nodded slowly. Take the time you need, but Lena, I meant what I said. I'm going to keep you safe, whatever it takes. He left soon after, taking most of his security with him, but leaving 2 men stationed discreetly outside. Mrs. Chen insisted on staying until closing time, refusing to leave Lena alone. That man cares about you, the older woman said as they locked up. I've seen enough in my life to know real feeling when I see it. It doesn't matter, Lena replied. His world and mine don't mix. Maybe they don't have to mix. Maybe they just need to find a way to coexist. Lena walked home that night with security following at a distance and thought about coexistence, about whether it was possible to care about someone without being consumed by their world, about whether safety was worth the loneliness she'd wrapped around herself like armor. She didn't have answers. But Monday was coming, and with it, another session with Adrian. Another hour of watching him work through words, watching his face light up when things clicked into place, watching him be something other than the Mafia Boss. Lena realized she was looking forward to it despite everything, and that terrified her most of all. Monday arrived wrapped in the kind of cold that made the city feel brittle, like it might shatter if touched too hard. Lena spent the day hyper-aware of every person who entered the library, every unfamiliar face, every sound that didn't belong. The security Adrian had left was subtle but present. She'd learned to spot them now, the way they positioned themselves with clear sightlines to the doors, the way their eyes never stopped moving. Mrs. Chen noticed her tension. You're wound tight as a spring, Maybe you should go home early. I'm fine, Lena said automatically, then caught herself. Actually, I'm terrified, but I'm not running. The older woman smiled with something that looked like pride. Good. Running never solved anything. By 6:30, the library was empty except for Lena and the invisible security. She went through closing procedures with mechanical precision, her mind already on the session ahead. She'd spent the weekend oscillating between wanting to cancel and desperately needing to see Adrian, to confirm that what had happened Friday hadn't destroyed the fragile thing growing between them. At 7 o'clock exactly, Adrian's knock came. Lena crossed to the door and found him standing in the cold, his expression unreadable. For a moment, they just looked at each other through the glass, and Lena saw her own uncertainty reflected in his eyes. She unlocked the door. Adrian stepped inside, bringing the smell of winter and something else, tension, sharp as ozone before a storm. He was dressed in his usual evening attire, suit impeccable, but there was something different about him. A hardness around his eyes, a set to his jaw that spoke of violence barely contained. "Did you handle it?" Lena asked quietly. "The Petrov situation?" "I made him an offer he couldn't refuse." Adrian's smile was cold. "Doubled the value of the shipment, plus a significant bonus for his inconvenience. He accepted. You're safe now." "Just like that?" "Just like that." Adrian set his bag down but didn't sit. "I also made it clear what would happen if anyone from his organization came near you again." He understood. Lena didn't want to know what that understanding had cost. "Thank you. Don't thank me for cleaning up my own mess." Adrian's voice was rough. "This never should have happened. I put you in danger the moment I walked into your library." "I chose to stay," Lena reminded him. "I chose to work for you, to teach you. Those were my decisions." "Were they? Or did I back you into a corner where saying no meant losing everything?" The question hung between them, honest and brutal. Lena thought about that first morning when Adrian had told her he'd bought the library, when he'd offered her a job that felt more like a golden cage. Had she really chosen? Or had he simply made every other option impossible? "Maybe both," she said finally. "Maybe you did back me into a corner, but I also chose not to fight my way out. I chose to see where this led." "And where has it led?" Adrian asked, his eyes searching her face. Lena looked at him, this dangerous man who'd invaded her sanctuary, who'd shown her vulnerability and violence in equal measure, who'd made her feel seen for the first time in years. "I don't know yet, but I'm still here." Something in Adrian's expression softened. "So am I." They settled into their usual positions across the table, and for a moment, normalcy returned. Adrian pulled out his homework, and Lena reviewed his progress on the thriller they'd been working through. He'd made it 3 chapters further than she'd expected, his notes thorough and insightful. "You're getting good at this," she said, genuinely impressed. "Your comprehension is improving faster than your reading speed, which is unusual but not unheard of." "I stayed up until 2 in the morning reading Friday night," Adrian admitted. "After I made sure the Petrov thing was handled, I needed something to take my mind off everything. The book helped." "Reading is escapism. That's exactly what it should be." "It's more than that." Adrian traced a finger along the book's cover. "It's like I spent my whole life thinking I was locked out of something, that there was this whole world of stories and ideas I couldn't access because the words didn't make sense. But now I can feel the door opening. It's incredible." The raw joy in his voice made Lena's chest tight. This was what she'd become a librarian for, moments like this, watching someone discover the power of reading, seeing their world expand. "What else have you been reading?" she asked. Adrian reached into his bag and pulled out 3 more books. "I might have gone a little overboard at the bookstore. The clerk helped me pick things at different difficulty levels." Lena examined the titles: a mystery novel, a biography of a jazz musician, and surprisingly, a collection of poetry. "These are good choices. Variety helps build different skills." "The poetry is hard," Adrian admitted. "I don't always understand what it means." "Poetry isn't always about understanding. Sometimes it's about feeling." Lena opened the collection to a random page. "Read this one for me." Adrian took the book and began reading, his voice halting at first but growing steadier. It was a piece about loss and memory, the words sparse but weighted with emotion. When he finished, he looked up, confused. "I got the words, but I don't know what it's saying." What did it make you feel? Sad, like something important was gone and couldn't come back. Then you understood it perfectly, Lena smiled. That's the whole point. They worked through several more poems, Lena guiding Adrian to trust his emotional responses instead of searching for hidden meanings. She watched his frustration slowly transform into something like wonder as he realized that his interpretations were valid, that there wasn't always a right answer. I never thought about it like that, he said. That reading could be subjective. The best reading always is. You bring yourself to the page, your experiences, your emotions, your perspective. The same book can mean completely different things to different people. Adrian was quiet for a moment, then asked, "What does it mean to you? This poem about loss?" Lena looked at the page, at the sparse lines about memory and absence. "It reminds me of my father, how grief changes over time. At first it's sharp and consuming, but eventually it becomes something softer. Not gone, just transformed." "How old were you when he died?" 12. Heart attack, completely unexpected. One day he was there, teaching me to ride a bike in the park. The next, he was gone. Lena traced the poem's words with her finger. "My mother fell apart. That's when she met my stepfather. She was so desperate for stability, for someone to fix things, that she married him within a year. He wasn't violent like her first husband, but he wasn't kind either, just absent. Present, but not there. And you learned to be invisible so you wouldn't be disappointed." It wasn't a question. Adrian had connected the dots, seen the pattern of her life with uncomfortable clarity. "Something like that," Lena admitted. "It was easier to need nothing than to keep being let down." "But you're not invisible anymore," Adrian said softly. "At least not to me." Lena met his eyes and felt the truth of his words settle into her bones. He saw her, really saw her, in a way no one had in years. It was terrifying and exhilarating and completely overwhelming. "We should get back to the lesson," she said, needing to break the intensity of the moment. Adrian nodded, understanding the retreat for what it was. They spent the rest of the hour on safer ground, discussing comprehension strategies and reading techniques. But the emotional honesty lingered between them, changing the quality of the air. When 8 o'clock came, Adrian packed his things slowly. "Same time Thursday?" "Unless you'd rather take a break," Lena offered. "After everything that happened, I don't want a break." Adrian's voice was firm. "These sessions are the best part of my week. I'm not giving them up unless you tell me to leave." Lena's heart stuttered. "I'm not telling you to leave." "Good." He smiled, and it reached his eyes this time. "Because I wasn't planning on listening anyway." The comment should have felt threatening, but instead it made Lena laugh, a real, genuine sound that surprised them both. "Good night, Adrian." "Good night, Lena." He left, and Lena stood in the quiet library, her name and his voice still echoing in her ears. When had they stopped using formal titles? When had Miss Whitmore and Mr. Varelli transformed into first names, into intimacy? She locked up and headed home, acutely aware of the security following at a distance. Adrian's protection, his care wrapped around her like armor she hadn't asked for, but found herself grateful for nonetheless. Thursday's session began with Adrian bringing unexpected news. "I met with the city council yesterday, proposed a partnership program. The library would offer literacy classes for adults in underserved communities, and I'd fund it completely. They loved it." Lena stared at him. "You what?" "Adult literacy programs. Free classes, professional instructors, materials provided. The library would be the hub." Adrian pulled out a proposal document, official and detailed. "I thought you could help design the curriculum, make it something that actually works." "Why would you do this?" "Because you were right, about finding another way, about using power for something other than violence." Adrian met her eyes. "I've spent 15 years building an empire on fear. Maybe it's time to build something else too." Lena took the proposal with shaking hands. It was comprehensive. Budget allocations, timeline, community outreach strategies. This wasn't a whim or a gesture. This was real, planned, thought through. "This would help hundreds of people," she said quietly. "That's the idea." Adrian leaned back in his chair. "I'm not saying I'm going to stop being who I am. The empire still runs, the business still operates. But maybe there's room for both. Maybe I can be the guy who controls the port shipments and the guy who funds literacy programs. That's a lot of contradictions to live with. I'm getting used to contradictions. His smile was wry. I'm a mafia boss who spends Monday and Thursday evenings learning to read poetry. Contradictions are my new normal. They spent the session discussing the program. Lena's expertise in library science combining with Adrian's understanding of community needs and resource allocation. She found herself getting excited, ideas flowing faster than she could write them down. This could actually work. They could actually help people. You're incredible when you're passionate about something, Adrian said during a lull in the planning. Your whole face lights up. Lena felt heat creep into her cheeks. I just care about literacy, about giving people access to books, to knowledge. It's more than that. You care about helping people find their voices, about making the invisible visible. He paused. You did that for me. I just taught you some reading strategies. You gave me access to something I thought was forever out of reach. You didn't judge me for struggling. You just helped. Adrian's voice went soft. Do you have any idea how rare that is? Someone who sees weakness and doesn't exploit it? Lena thought about the world he lived in, where vulnerability was a weapon waiting to be used against you, where showing weakness meant death. You're not weak, Adrian. You're one of the strongest people I've ever met. Strength is easy. It's letting someone see past it that's hard. They were sitting across from each other, the table between them suddenly feeling like miles and inches at the same time. Lena could feel the pull between them, magnetic and dangerous. She wanted to reach across the space, to touch his hand, to close the distance. Instead, she stood abruptly. We should work on the next chapter of your book. Adrian watched her retreat with knowing eyes, but didn't push. They finished the session with careful professionalism, both of them dancing around the thing growing between them. As he was leaving, Adrian paused at the door. Lena, I need to tell you something. Her heart kicked. What? I'm having a dinner next week. Business associates, community leaders, some city officials. It's about the literacy program and some other initiatives. He took a breath. I'd like you to be there, as my guest. Your guest, Lena repeated carefully. People need to see that this program has credibility, that it's not just me throwing money around. Having the head librarian there, the person who will actually be running it, it matters. It made sense professionally. It was a reasonable request. Except Lena could see in his eyes that it was more than that. What would I be there as? She asked quietly. The librarian? Or something else? Adrian held her gaze. That's up to you. The answer was both perfect and terrible. He was giving her the choice, the power to define what this was between them. No pressure, no demands, just an open question. I'll think about it, Lena said. That's all I ask. After he left, Lena sat in the empty library and tried to imagine herself at a dinner full of dangerous people, sitting beside Adrian as his, what? Employee? Colleague? The word she couldn't quite say, even to herself. She spent the weekend agonizing over the decision, called her mother, who predictably told her to follow her heart, talked to Mrs. Chen, who said, sometimes the scariest choice is the right one. Even consulted the library cat, a stray that had adopted them months ago, who simply purred and offered no advice whatsoever. Monday came, and with it, her answer. Adrian arrived at 7, and before he could even set his bag down, Lena said, I'll go. To your dinner. I'll be there. His smile was bright enough to light the whole library. Yeah? Yeah, but I need to understand what I'm walking into, who will be there, what's expected of me, what this means. Adrian sat down and laid it out clearly. The dinner was at an upscale restaurant he owned, private room, 20 guests. Mix of legitimate business people and less legitimate associates. City councilwoman, chief of a community development nonprofit, his lawyer, Marco, his second in command. Some others from his organization. You'll be there as the librarian heading the literacy program, Adrian explained. That's the official story. You'll talk about the curriculum, answer questions, make it clear this is a real initiative. I need them to see this as legitimate. And unofficially, they'll know you're important to me, that you're under my protection, that anyone who touches you answers to me. His voice went hard on the last part. Lena processed this. So I'll be making a statement just by being there. Yes. What happens after, when people start asking questions about us? I'll handle it. But Lena, if you're not ready for this, if it's too much... It's terrifying, Lena interrupted. But I'm tired of making decisions based on fear. You asked me to stop hiding, so I'm trying. Adrian reached across the table and took her hand. It was the first time he'd touched her since that desperate hug after Petrov's men had threatened her, and the contact sent electricity racing through her nerves. You're the bravest person I know, he said quietly. I'm terrified literally all the time. That's what makes it brave. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's doing the thing anyway. They sat like that for a moment, hands linked across the table, the weight of what was happening between them finally acknowledged. Then Lena gently pulled back, needing space to breathe. We should work on your reading. Adrian's smile was understanding. Whatever you need. The session was different after that. There was an ease between them now, a settled quality that came from finally being honest about what they were to each other. Not lovers, not yet, maybe not ever. But not just tutor and student either. Something else, something neither of them had words for yet. When 8 o'clock came, Adrian lingered at the door longer than usual. The dinner's Friday. I'll have a dress sent to you. Tell me your size. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. I want to. His eyes were warm. Let me do this. Please. Lena gave him her size, feeling like she was surrendering something more significant than measurements. Adrian smiled, satisfied, and left with a promise to see her Thursday. The dress arrived Wednesday afternoon. Lena opened the box in her apartment and gasped. It was stunning, deep sapphire blue, elegant and simple, with clean lines that would skim her figure perfectly. The kind of dress she'd never buy for herself, could never afford, would never have occasion to wear. Until now. She tried it on and barely recognized herself in the mirror. The woman looking back at her wasn't invisible. She was striking, confident, visible in every possible way. Thursday's session was charged with anticipation. Adrian couldn't stop looking at her, and Lena caught herself watching him when he was focused on reading. The air between them felt electric, full of possibility and danger. You're going to be amazing tomorrow, Adrian said as they wrapped up. How do you know? Because you're amazing every day. Tomorrow, people will just finally notice. Lena's breath caught at the simple sincerity in his voice. Adrian, I know, we're not there yet, I know. He stood, gathering his things. But we're somewhere. And that's more than I ever expected to have. He left, and Lena stood alone in the library, her heart racing and her future suddenly wide open with terrifying possibilities. Friday arrived cold and clear, the kind of day where everything felt sharp-edged and significant. Lena went through her usual routine, but nothing felt usual. She was hyper-aware of every minute ticking toward evening, toward the moment she'd step into Adrian's world fully. Mrs. Chen noticed her distraction. Big plans tonight? Dinner, with Adrian and some business associates. The older woman's eyebrows rose. Dinner? That's quite a step. It's about the literacy program, Lena said quickly. Of course it is. Mrs. Chen's smile was knowing. That's why you've checked your reflection 5 times today and jumped every time the phone rang. Lena couldn't deny it. I'm nervous. Good. Means it matters. Mrs. Chen squeezed her hand. Just be yourself. That's who he sees when he looks at you. At 6 o'clock, Adrian sent a car. Not the usual black SUV, but a sleek sedan with a professional driver who treated Lena like she was made of glass. She sat in the back seat, the blue dress perfect against the leather, and watched the city transform as they drove from her quiet neighborhood toward the glittering downtown. The restaurant was housed in a converted warehouse, all exposed brick and ambient lighting. The driver led her to a private entrance where Adrian waited. He was devastating in a tailored black suit, his hair perfectly styled, looking every inch the powerful man he was. But when he saw Lena, his expression transformed into something soft and wondering. You're beautiful, he said simply. The dress helps. The dress is just fabric. You make it beautiful. He offered his arm. Ready? Lena took his arm, feeling the solid warmth of him through the expensive fabric. As ready as I'll ever be. Adrian led her inside to a private dining room where 20 people were already mingling. Conversation paused as they entered, every eye turning to assess the newcomer. Lena felt the weight of their attention like a physical thing, but Adrian's hand covered hers where it rested on his arm, steadying her. Everyone, this is Lena Whitmore, head librarian and director of our new literacy initiative. Lena, this is everyone who matters in this city. He made introductions smoothly, his hand never leaving hers. City Councilwoman Martinez, who championed the library funding, Thomas Chen, CEO of a major development firm, and Mrs. Chen's nephew, coincidentally. Rachel Katz, head of the community nonprofit, and then the others. Marco, Adrian's second-in-command, a sharp-eyed man who assessed Lena with careful neutrality. Dmitri, who ran Adrian's casino operations. Victoria, who handled real estate acquisitions. People who lived at those gray spaces between legitimate and criminal, who knew exactly who Adrian was and worked with him anyway. They were polite, professional, curious. Lena fielded questions about the literacy program with growing confidence, her passion for the subject overriding her nerves. She could do this. She knew her material, believed in the mission, and these people were genuinely interested. Adrian stayed close but didn't hover, letting her shine while making it clear through small touches and watchful attention that she was his. The message was subtle but unmistakable. Lena Whitmore was under Adrian Varelli's protection, and anyone who forgot that did so at their peril. Dinner was served, multiple courses, each more elaborate than the last. Lena found herself seated between Adrian and Councilwoman Martinez, which should have been intimidating but actually proved engaging. Martinez was sharp and funny, genuinely excited about the program's potential impact. "We've been trying to get funding for adult literacy for years," the councilwoman said. "Having private backing like this changes everything." "Adrian believes in it," Lena said, then caught herself. "Mr. Virelli, I mean." Martinez smiled knowingly. "It's Adrian, is it? Interesting." Lena felt heat creep into her face but didn't deny it. What was the point? Everyone here could see the connection between them, the way Adrian looked at her, the way she'd unconsciously leaned into his orbit. Midway through the main course, Marco leaned across the table. "Miss Whitmore, I have to ask, how did you convince Adrian to fund this program? He's not exactly known for charitable initiatives." The table went quiet. It was a test, Lena realized. They were all watching to see how she'd handle being questioned about her influence over the boss. "I didn't convince him of anything," Lena said clearly. "He came to me with the idea. I just helped make it viable." "But surely you influenced the decision somehow. Adrian doesn't do anything without a reason." Lena met Marco's eyes directly. "Then maybe you don't know him as well as you think." The silence was deafening. Then Adrian laughed, genuine and surprised, and the tension broke. "She's got you there, Marco. Turns out I'm capable of independent thought after all." The table chuckled, and conversation resumed. But Lena felt the shift. She'd passed some kind of test, proven she could hold her own. Marco nodded at her with something that might have been respect. The evening progressed smoothly after that. Lena relaxed into the rhythm of conversation, finding herself actually enjoying the company despite the undercurrent of danger that hummed beneath the politeness. These were complicated people living complicated lives, but they were also funny and smart and surprisingly welcoming. As dessert was being served, Victoria, the real estate woman, cornered Lena near the bar. "I'm going to be direct because I like you," Victoria said without preamble. "Adrian's been different the last few months. Calmer, makes different choices than he used to. That's because of you, isn't it?" Lena didn't know how to answer that. "I just teach him to read." "Honey, if you think that's all you're doing, you're either lying to yourself or to me." Victoria's smile was sharp. "He looks at you like you hung the moon. I've known Adrian for 10 years and I've never seen him look at anyone like that. It's not, whatever it is or isn't, just know that people notice. And in our world, being noticed can be dangerous." Victoria's expression softened slightly. "Watch your back. Adrian will protect you, but he can't be everywhere. Make sure you know who to trust." Before Lena could respond, the windows exploded inward in a shower of glass. The world erupted into chaos. People screamed, bodies hit the floor. Lena felt someone tackle her. Adrian, she realized, his body covering hers as gunfire erupted from the shattered windows. "Stay down," he shouted over the noise. Lena's ears were ringing, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. She could see Marco and Dmitri returning fire, could hear Adrian shouting orders, could smell gunpowder and fear. This was his world. Not the polite dinner conversation or the literacy programs. This, violence and chaos, and the constant threat of death. The shooting seemed to last forever, but probably only took seconds. Then there were sirens in the distance, and the attackers were retreating. Adrian pulled Lena to her feet, his hands running over her frantically. "Are you hurt?" "Lena, look at me. Are you hurt?" She shook her head, unable to form words. She wasn't hurt, but she was drowning in adrenaline and terror, and the sudden, visceral understanding of what it meant to be connected to Adrian Varelli. Around them, people were checking on each other. Councilwoman Martinez was shaken, but unharmed. Victoria had a cut on her arm from flying glass, but was already on her phone calling for cleanup. Marco was directing security, his weapon still drawn. "Petrov," Marco spat. "Had to be. This is retaliation for—" "Not now," Adrian cut him off, his eyes never leaving Lena. "Get her out of here. Take her home. Full security detail." "No." Lena's voice came out stronger than she felt. "I'm not leaving you." "Lena." "I said no." She gripped his arms, feeling them shake beneath her hands. He was scared, she realized. For her. "If I run now, I'll never stop running." Adrian stared at her, conflict warring in his expression. Then he pulled her into his arms, crushing her against his chest. "You could have been killed. Because of me, you could have—" "But I wasn't." Lena pulled back enough to look at him. "We're both okay. Everyone's okay. This time. But there'll be a next time. And a time after that. This is what my life is, Lena. Violence and danger and people trying to kill me. I can't protect you from that." "Then don't. Teach me to protect myself." The words surprised them both. Adrian's eyes widened. "What?" "You said you wanted me to stop hiding, to fight instead of survive. So teach me." Lena's hands were still shaking, but her voice was steady. "Teach me how to exist in your world, how to defend myself, how to be something other than a victim." "Lena, that's not— You don't know what you're asking. I know exactly what I'm asking. Either I'm part of your life or I'm not. Either I can handle this or I can't. But I'm done being the fragile thing you have to protect." She met his eyes with fierce determination. "So teach me." Adrian studied her for a long moment, searching her face for something. Then, slowly, he smiled. "All right, but we do this right. No half measures." "No half measures," Lena agreed. Around them, the cleanup was already underway. This was clearly routine for these people, the way they handled a shooting with the same efficiency as a business meeting. Police sirens were getting closer, but Marco assured Adrian everything was handled, that the official story was ready. Lena watched it all with new eyes. This was the machine that ran beneath the surface of the city. These were the people who made things happen, who controlled the flow of money and power and violence. And she'd just agreed to step fully into it. Adrian drove her home himself, his security following. They didn't speak during the ride, but his hand found hers in the dark of the car, holding tight. At her apartment building, he walked her to her door. "You sure about this? About all of it?" Lena thought about the shattered glass, the gunfire, the way her whole life had just fractured into before and after. She thought about Adrian's arms around her, his fear for her safety, the way he'd put his body between her and danger without hesitation. "I'm sure," she said. Adrian leaned in, and for a breathless moment, Lena thought he might kiss her. Instead, he pressed his forehead to hers, his breath warm against her skin. "I'll keep you safe," he whispered. "Whatever it takes." "I know." He pulled back, his hand lingering on her cheek. "Monday, 7 o'clock. We start your training." Then he was gone, and Lena was alone in her apartment, the blue dress still perfect despite everything, her life irrevocably changed. She went to the window and looked out at the city spreading below her. Somewhere out there, people were trying to kill Adrian. Somewhere, deals were being made and broken. Somewhere, the machinery of crime and power continued turning. And she'd just chosen to step into the gears instead of staying safely outside. Lena pressed her hand against the glass and felt the cold seep through. She should be terrified. She was terrified. But beneath the fear was something else. Excitement, purpose, the electric thrill of finally choosing action over hiding. Monday would come. The training would begin. And Lena Whitmore, the invisible librarian who'd spent years hiding from the world, would learn to fight. She smiled at her reflection in the dark glass, barely recognizing the woman looking back. That woman wasn't invisible anymore. The weekend crawled by with agonizing slowness. Lena went through the motions of normal life, grocery shopping, laundry, reading in her apartment, but her mind kept circling back to Friday night. The sound of shattering glass, the sharp crack of gunfire, the weight of Adrian's body covering hers, protecting her even as bullets flew. She'd told him to teach her to fight, to survive in his world. Now, in the quiet safety of her apartment, the boldness of that demand felt almost absurd. What did she know about violence? About defending herself? She was a librarian who'd spent her entire life avoiding confrontation. But every time doubt crept in, she remembered the alternative: staying invisible, staying safe, watching from the sidelines while Adrian lived in constant danger. The thought made her chest ache in ways she didn't want to examine too closely. Sunday evening, her phone rang. Adrian's name on the screen made her pulse jump. Hello? Change of plans for tomorrow, Adrian said without preamble. Instead of the library, I'm sending a car to pick you up at 6. We're going somewhere else for your first lesson. Where? My gym. It's private, secure, better equipped for what I need to teach you. Lena's stomach fluttered nervously. What exactly are you planning to teach me? How to think like someone who survives instead of someone who hides. His voice was gentle but firm. Wear comfortable clothes, sneakers, and Lena, eat something substantial before you come. You'll need the energy. After he hung up, Lena stood in her kitchen and tried to imagine what tomorrow would bring. Adrian's gym, private training, learning to be something other than the woman who'd shushed a mafia boss and somehow ended up in his orbit. She pulled out her phone and called her mother for the second time that weekend. Lena? Sweetheart, what's wrong? You never call this much. I need to tell you something. Lena sat down at her small kitchen table. Friday night, I went to a dinner with Adrian, his business dinner, and there was an incident, shooting. We're all fine, but someone shot at you? Her mother's voice went sharp with fear. Lena Marie, what have you gotten yourself into? I don't know, Lena admitted, but I'm not running from it. He's going to teach me how to protect myself, how to exist in his world. Silence on the other end, long enough that Lena thought the call had dropped. Then her mother said quietly, You care about him. This man, this dangerous man. You care about him. It wasn't a question, but Lena answered anyway. Yes. Oh, honey. Her mother's voice was thick with emotion. I spent so many years watching you hide, watching you make yourself small. I was worried you'd spend your whole life alone because you were too afraid to be seen. Now you're choosing the most dangerous kind of visible there is. Are you telling me not to do this? I'm telling you to be careful, to know what you're risking. Her mother paused. But I'm also telling you I'm proud of you for choosing something instead of just avoiding everything, even if what you're choosing terrifies me. They talked for another hour, and when Lena finally hung up, she felt steadier. Her mother was right. This was terrifying, but it was also a choice, made with open eyes and full awareness of the consequences. Monday arrived cold and gray, the kind of November day that hinted at the brutal winter to come. Lena spent her shift at the library in a state of distracted anxiety. Mrs. Chen noticed immediately. You look like you're preparing for battle, the older woman observed. Something like that, Lena murmured. At 5:30, she changed in the library bathroom into the workout clothes she'd brought. Black leggings, a fitted tank top, sneakers. She pulled her hair back into a tight ponytail and studied herself in the mirror. She looked small, vulnerable, completely unprepared for whatever Adrian had planned. The car arrived at 6 exactly. The driver was one of Adrian's regular security team, a man named James who'd been part of her protection detail since the Petrov incident. He greeted her with professional courtesy and held the door. They drove for 20 minutes, leaving the familiar downtown area and heading into an industrial district Lena had never visited. The gym was housed in a converted warehouse, nondescript from the outside except for the high-end security cameras visible at every entrance. James led her inside to a space that was nothing like the commercial gyms Lena had seen. This was clearly private, clearly expensive, and clearly designed for serious training. Heavy bags hung from reinforced ceiling beams. A full boxing ring occupied one corner. Weight equipment lined the walls. Mats covered most of the floor, and in the center of it all stood Adrian. He was dressed simply in black athletic pants and a fitted gray shirt, his hair slightly disheveled. He looked different like this. Still dangerous, but more raw, more real. When he saw Lena, his expression softened into something warm. "You came. Did you think I wouldn't? I hoped you would, but I would have understood if you'd changed your mind." Adrian crossed to her, his eyes scanning her face. "How are you? Really?" "Terrified," Lena admitted. "But here." "Good. Fear keeps you sharp. It's only a problem when it paralyzes you." He gestured to the space around them. "This is where I train, where my people train. It's completely secure, cameras, guards, no one gets in without my permission. Whatever we do here stays here." Lena looked around, trying to imagine herself learning violence in this space. "Where do we start?" "With the truth." Adrian's voice was serious. "What happened Friday night could happen again. Will happen again, probably. People want me dead. They'll use anyone connected to me as leverage or targets. You need to understand that clearly before we go any further." "I understand." "Do you?" "Because understanding intellectually and understanding in your bones are different things." Adrian moved closer. "If you stay in my life, you're choosing constant danger. Vigilance. Never fully relaxing because the threat is always there. Is that really what you want?" Lena met his eyes directly. "I want to stop being afraid. I want to be able to stand next to you without being a liability. I want—" She paused, gathering courage. "I want to be someone who chooses to stay, instead of someone who has to be protected." Something fierce and tender crossed Adrian's face. "Then that's what I'll teach you. But we do this my way. No arguments, no shortcuts. If I tell you to do something, you do it. Understand?" "Yes." "Good." Adrian moved to the mats and gestured for her to follow. First lesson, awareness. Most people go through life oblivious to their surroundings. They don't notice threats until it's too late. That changes now. For the next hour, Adrian drilled her on observation. How to scan a room when you enter. How to identify exits. How to recognize when someone's watching you. How to read body language and intent. It was exhausting and humbling. Lena realized how much she'd missed her entire life, how thoroughly she'd trained herself not to see. "Again," Adrian said patiently when she failed to spot the security camera he'd pointed out earlier. "Look at the corners. High angles. Where would you put a camera if you wanted to watch this space?" Lena looked again, really looked, and finally spotted it. There, upper right corner behind the pipes. Better. Now the exits. She counted them, noting the main door they'd entered through, 2 emergency exits on opposite walls, and what looked like a service entrance near the office area. 4 ways out. "Good. Now tell me which one you'd use if someone came through the main door shooting." Lena's pulse jumped at the casual way he described violence. "The emergency exit to my left. It's closest and leads outside based on the signage." "Wrong." Adrian's voice was firm but not unkind. "That exit opens onto an alley with only one way out. You'd be trapped. The service entrance leads to a back corridor with multiple paths. Always choose the option with the most escape routes." They went through scenario after scenario until Lena's head spun with information. By the time Adrian called a break, she was mentally exhausted. "How do you live like this?" she asked, accepting the water bottle he handed her. "Always analyzing, always watching?" "It becomes second nature. You don't think about it consciously after a while." Adrian sat beside her on the mat. "But you're right. It's exhausting at first. Give it time." "How much time did you have to learn all this?" Adrian's expression went distant. "I was 12 when my uncle took me in after my father left. He ran the organization before me. He taught me that survival meant constant vigilance, that trust was a luxury that got people killed." He paused. "I had 1 week of training before he sent me on my first job. Learned real fast after that." Lena tried to imagine Adrian as a 12-year-old boy thrust into a world of violence and crime. "That's awful." "It was necessary. In my world, you either learn quick or you die young." His eyes found hers. "But you're not me. You don't have to learn everything overnight. We'll take this at whatever pace you need." "What if I can't do it? What if I'm just not built for this?" "You tackled a man who was attacking me during the fight at the library," Adrian reminded her. "You stood your ground when Petrov's people threatened you. You didn't run Friday night when the shooting started. Lena, you're already braver than you think. The memory of the library fight made Lena's stomach churn. She'd acted on pure instinct that night, terror and adrenaline drowning out rational thought. I wasn't being brave, I was panicking. Bravery is acting despite the panic. That's the whole point. Adrian stood and offered his hand. Come on, next lesson. He led her to the heavy bags and demonstrated basic striking form. You don't need to knock someone out. You just need to create enough pain and surprise that you can escape. Forget what you've seen in movies. Real fighting is fast, ugly, and brutal. Adrian showed her where to hit for maximum effect. Eyes, throat, groin, knees. Vulnerable points that didn't require strength, just accuracy and commitment. He had her practice on the bag until her knuckles ached and her arms trembled. Harder, he urged when her strikes were tentative. You're not going to hurt the bag, and if this were real, holding back would get you killed. Commit to it. Lena threw another punch, putting her weight behind it this time. The impact jarred her arm, but the bag swung satisfyingly. Better. Again. They worked until 8 o'clock when Adrian finally called time. Lena was drenched in sweat, every muscle quivering with exhaustion, but there was something exhilarating about it too. She'd done something today, learned something, taken one small step away from being helpless. Same time Wednesday? Adrian asked as she gathered her things. I thought we were meeting Thursday for your reading session. We are. But if we're doing this training seriously, twice a week minimum, Mondays and Wednesdays for fighting, Thursdays we keep for reading. His smile was soft. I'm not giving up our reading sessions. Those are still the best part of my week. Warmth flooded Lena's chest. Mine too. Adrian stepped closer, and the air between them charged with something electric. You were incredible today. Focused, determined. You're going to be good at this. I'm terrified at this, Lena corrected. Same thing. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture unbearably tender. Let me drive you home. They left the gym together, James and the security team following at a discreet distance. In the car, Adrian kept glancing at her like he was checking to make sure she was real. What? Lena finally asked. I keep expecting you to realize what you've gotten into and run, but you're still here. Where else would I be? Adrian's laugh was low and rough. Anywhere safe. Anywhere that doesn't involve learning hand-to-hand combat and dodging bullets. Maybe I'm tired of safe. Lena surprised herself with the truth of it. Maybe I'd rather be terrified with you than bored alone. Adrian's hand found hers in the dark of the car, his fingers lacing through hers. They didn't speak for the rest of the drive, but the silence was comfortable, loaded with things neither of them was quite ready to say. At her apartment building, Adrian walked her to her door again. This was becoming a ritual, Lena realized, his way of making sure she was truly safe before he left. Wednesday, 6 o'clock, he reminded her. We'll work on defensive techniques. How to break holds, create distance. I'll be there. Adrian hesitated, then leaned in and pressed a kiss to her forehead. It was chaste, brief, but it sent heat cascading through Lena's entire body. Good night, Lena. Good night, Adrian. She watched him disappear down the hallway, then let herself into her apartment and leaned against the closed door. Her forehead still tingled where his lips had touched, and her heart was doing complicated gymnastics in her chest. This was dangerous. Not the fighting lessons or the threat of violence, but this. The way she'd started counting hours until she'd see him again. The way his smile made her feel like she could do anything. The way his presence had gone from terrifying to essential. Wednesday's session was harder than Monday's. Adrian taught her how to break common holds, wrist grabs, chokes, bear hugs from behind. Each technique required Lena to get close to him, to feel his hands on her, to practice escaping his grip. It was intimate in ways that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with trust. Adrian could hurt her so easily. He had the strength, the skill, the knowledge. But every time he demonstrated a hold, he explained what he was doing, checked that she was okay, adjusted his grip if she seemed uncomfortable. The key is momentum, he explained as he showed her how to break a wrist grab. You don't fight against the strength. You use it. Move with the rotation, redirect the energy. Lena tried it, and her first attempt was clumsy. Adrian's grip didn't budge. Again, faster this time. Don't think, just move. She tried again, and this time something clicked. Her hand twisted free and she stumbled back, startled by her own success. Adrian grinned. There you go, once more. They drilled the technique until it became muscle memory, then moved on to the next scenario. By the end of the session, Lena had learned 6 different escapes, and her confidence had grown exponentially. You're a natural at this, Adrian said as they cooled down. I'm a terrified librarian flailing around. You're a quick learner who listens and adapts. That's more important than natural aggression. He grabbed 2 water bottles and handed her one. Most people freeze in a real confrontation. The fact that you can override that instinct is huge. I had a good teacher. You had necessity. I'm just showing you techniques. Adrian sat beside her on the mat, close enough that their shoulders touched. How are you feeling about all this? Really? Lena considered the question. Her body ached from the training, her mind was overwhelmed with information, and she was more exhausted than she'd been in years. But underneath all that was something else, a sense of capability she'd never experienced before. Powerful, she said finally, like I have choices instead of just hoping nothing bad happens. Good, that's the whole point. Adrian was quiet for a moment, then asked, Are you sleeping okay? After Friday? The question caught Lena off guard with its gentleness. Not really. I keep hearing the glass breaking, seeing the bullets hit the wall. Nightmares? Some. Mostly just lying awake replaying it. Adrian nodded, understanding. That's normal. It takes time to process violence, especially if you're not used to it. It gets easier. Does it get easier for you? Not easier, just familiar. His voice was rough. I still see the faces of everyone I've... He stopped himself. Some things don't fade. You just learn to carry them. Lena looked at him. This complicated man who'd built an empire on violence but read poetry like it might save him. Who protected her fiercely but taught her to protect herself. Who lived in constant danger but made room for vulnerability anyway. Adrian, can I ask you something? Anything. Why me? Out of everyone in this city, everyone you could have chosen to spend time with, teach, protect, why me? Adrian turned to face her fully, his dark eyes intense. Because you shushed me. Because when everyone else in this city looks at me and sees power or fear or opportunity, you looked at me and saw a guy being disruptive in your library. You weren't impressed. You weren't scared. You just wanted quiet. He reached up and cupped her face gently. You're the only person who's ever made me feel normal. Like I could be someone other than what I've become. Lena's breath caught. You are someone other than what you've become. You're brilliant and determined. You're learning to read for pleasure. You're funding literacy programs. You're choosing negotiation over violence. Because of you. All of it. Because of you. That's not true. It is. Adrian's thumb brushed her cheekbone. You made me want to be better. Not because you demanded it or manipulated me into it, but because being around you makes me remember there's more to life than survival and power. Lena felt tears prick her eyes. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be what you need. You already are. Just by being yourself. Just by staying. His forehead touched hers, and they breathed together in the quiet of the gym. I know I'm asking too much. I know my world is dangerous and complicated and probably going to destroy us both. But I can't seem to let you go. Then don't, Lena whispered. Don't let go. The distance between them collapsed. Adrian's lips found hers, and the kiss was nothing like Lena had imagined. It was desperate and gentle, fierce and tender, like he was trying to memorize her through touch alone. Her hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, and when he groaned against her mouth, heat flooded through her entire body. They broke apart, breathing hard, foreheads still pressed together. We shouldn't, Adrian said, even as his hands tightened on her waist. This is a terrible idea. Probably the worst, Lena agreed. But I don't care. Adrian laughed, rough and genuine. You're going to ruin me, Lena Whitmore. Good. You've already ruined me. They kissed again, slower this time, savoring instead of desperate. When they finally pulled apart, Adrian's eyes were bright with something that looked dangerously like joy. Come on, he said, standing and pulling her up with him. Let me take you home before I forget every reason why we should take this slow. In the car, their hands stayed linked. At her door, Adrian kissed her again, soft and promising. Thursday, he murmured against her lips. Reading session. I finished the thriller. We can start something new. I'd like that. One more kiss, lingering. Good night, Lena. Good night. Lena floated into her apartment and immediately called her mother. He kissed me. Her mother's delighted laughter filled the line. Finally, I was wondering how long you two would dance around it. They talked for an hour, and when Lena finally hung up and collapsed into bed, she fell asleep with a smile on her face for the first time since the shooting. Thursday's reading session felt different. There was new awareness between them, a charge in the air every time their hands brushed or their eyes met. Adrian had indeed finished the thriller, and his analysis was insightful and thorough. The twist worked because the author planted clues throughout, he explained, showing her his notes. I went back and found them after the reveal. Very clever. You're reading like a critic now, Lena said, proud. Analyzing technique, structure, that's advanced comprehension. I had a good teacher. Adrian's smile was warm. What should I read next? They spent the hour discussing options, eventually settling on a literary novel that would challenge him in new ways. But the real conversation happened in the spaces between words, in the way Adrian's leg pressed against hers under the table, the way Lena's hand found his when she explained a concept, the way they both leaned closer than necessary. At 8 o'clock, Adrian didn't immediately leave. Instead, he pulled Lena to her feet and into his arms, kissing her with the intensity of someone who'd been waiting all evening for this moment. I've been thinking about doing that since you walked in, he admitted when they broke apart. Only since I walked in? I've been thinking about it all week. Adrian's laugh was low and pleased. Come to dinner with me, tomorrow night. Not a business dinner, just us. Like a date? Exactly like a date. His eyes were hopeful, almost nervous. Say yes. Yes. The smile that broke across Adrian's face was brilliant. He kissed her again, then forced himself to step back. I should go before I forget we're in a library. It's closed. No one's here but us. Dangerous thing to tell a man with very little self-control around you. But he gathered his things, stealing one more kiss at the door. Tomorrow, 7 o'clock. Wear that blue dress if you want. Or anything. You're beautiful regardless. After he left, Lena stood in the quiet library and felt the magnitude of what was happening. She was falling for the Mafia Boss, had maybe already fallen, and instead of terrifying her into running, it felt like finally coming alive. Friday's date was perfect. Adrian took her to a small Italian restaurant tucked away in a quiet neighborhood, family-owned and intimate. They talked for hours about everything, books and childhood memories, favorite foods and dreams for the future. Adrian told her about his plans to gradually legitimize more of his operations, to build something that could eventually exist fully in the light. Lena told him about her hopes to expand the library's programs, to create real community impact. They talked like people planning a future together, and neither of them acknowledged how fragile that future might be. Walking to the car after dinner, Adrian pulled Lena close against the November cold. She fit perfectly against his side, and the rightness of it made her chest ache. Thank you, he said quietly, for seeing me, for not running, for being brave enough to stay. Thank you for making me want to be brave. At her apartment, their goodnight kiss turned into 10 minutes against her door, Adrian's hands tangled in her hair, Lena's fingers digging into his shoulders. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Adrian rested his forehead against hers. I should go. You should. Neither of them moved. Lena, Adrian stopped, seeming to wrestle with words. You're important to me. More important than anything has been in a very long time. I need you to know that. I know. You're important to me too. If anything ever happened to you because of me, don't. Lena pressed her fingers to his lips. Don't borrow trouble. We're here now. That's enough. Adrian kissed her fingers, then her palm, then her lips once more. Good night. Good night. Lena watched him leave, then went inside and leaned against the door, her heart full and terrified in equal measure. She was in love with Adrian Virelli. The thought should have sent her running, but instead it settled into her bones like truth. The weekend passed in a blur of training sessions and stolen phone calls. Monday brought another combat lesson where Adrian taught her how to fight from the ground. Wednesday, they worked on weapons awareness. Not how to use them, but how to recognize them, how to create distance when someone was armed. Through it all, they grew closer. Touches lingered. Conversations deepened. The space between them became charged with possibility and promise. Thursday evening, as they wrapped up their reading session, Adrian pulled an envelope from his bag. "I have something for you." Lena opened it to find official documents, the literacy program charter, bearing both their signatures as co-directors. "We're doing this together," Adrian explained. "Equal partners. Your expertise, my resources. What do you think?" Lena stared at the papers, overwhelmed. This was real. The program, their partnership, the future they were building. "I think yes. To all of it." Adrian's smile was radiant. He pulled her into his arms, and Lena went willingly, feeling safer and more terrified than she'd ever been. Outside the library windows, the city glittered with lights, beautiful and dangerous and full of promise. Somewhere in that darkness, threats lurked, rivals and enemies who would see Lena as a weakness to exploit. But here, in Adrian's arms, surrounded by books and quiet, Lena felt invincible. The storm was coming. She could feel it building on the horizon. But for now, in this moment, she chose to be present, chose to be brave, chose to love a dangerous man and accept whatever consequences that choice would bring. The storm broke on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks later. Lena was opening the library when Marco appeared, his face grim in a way that made her stomach drop. He didn't bother with pleasantries. "Adrian needs you at the warehouse. Now!" "What happened?" "Petrov happened. He took 2 of our shipments and 3 of our people. Left a message that he wants to meet." Marco's jaw clenched. "Adrian's planning to go. Alone. He won't listen to reason." Lena's blood ran cold. "Take me to him." The warehouse was in the industrial district, a massive building that served as the nerve center of Adrian's legitimate shipping operations. Inside it was chaos, men shouting into phones, others checking weapons, the air thick with tension and barely contained violence. Adrian stood in the center of it all, issuing orders with cold precision. When he saw Lena, something flickered across his face, relief and fear warring for dominance. "You shouldn't be here," he said, even as he crossed to her. "Marco said you're meeting Petrov, alone. That's suicide. It's strategy. He wants to make a show of power, to prove he can force me to negotiate on his terms." Adrian's voice was hard. "I go alone. He feels in control, brings his guard down. That's when we strike." "We?" Lena looked around at the armed men. "You mean you're planning an ambush? I'm ending this. Petrov has been a problem for months. He threatened you, attacked our people, disrupted our operations. It's time to remove him from the board." The casual way Adrian discussed murder made Lena's chest tight. This was the side of him she'd been able to mostly avoid. The mafia boss who solved problems with violence, who saw people as pieces to be moved or eliminated. "There has to be another way," she said quietly. "There isn't. Not this time." Adrian cupped her face gently. "This is what I am, Lena. What I do. I've tried negotiation with Petrov. He sees it as weakness. The only language he understands is force. Then use force, but don't walk into a trap alone. I won't be alone. Marco and the others will be positioned around the meeting site, but Petrov needs to see me isolated, vulnerable. It's the only way this works." Lena wanted to argue, to find some alternative that didn't involve Adrian putting himself in the crosshairs. But she could see the determination in his eyes, the cold calculation that made him dangerous and successful. "When?" she asked. "Tonight, 8 o'clock. Abandoned factory on the waterfront." Adrian pulled her close. "I need you to stay here, safe, protected. Can you do that for me?" Every instinct screamed at Lena to refuse, to demand to go with him, to not let him out of her sight. But she'd learned enough in the past weeks to understand that emotions could get people killed in Adrian's world. "Promise me you'll come back," she whispered against his chest. "I promise. This will be over tonight, one way or another, and then we can move forward without looking over our shoulders." They held each other for a long moment, surrounded by the machinery of Adrian's empire preparing for war. Then Marco approached, his expression apologetic. "Boss, we need to go over the positions one more time." Adrian kissed Lena's forehead. "Stay here. James will keep you safe. I'll be back before midnight." He walked away to confer with his men, and Lena stood frozen, watching the man she loved prepare to kill or be killed. The casual efficiency of it all was staggering. These men had done this before, would do it again. Violence as routine as any other business transaction. James appeared at her elbow. "Miss Whitmore, there's a secure office upstairs. You'll be comfortable there." "I'm not hiding in an office while Adrian walks into danger." "With respect, ma'am, that's exactly what you're going to do. Boss's orders." James's tone was kind but inflexible. "He needs to focus tonight. Can't do that if he's worried about you." Lena wanted to argue, but she knew James was right. She let him lead her to a second-floor office that overlooked the warehouse floor. Through the windows, she could see Adrian directing his people, pointing to maps, his movements precise and controlled. This was Adrian Virelli, the Mafia Boss, and watching him work was both terrifying and mesmerizing. Hours crawled by. Lena tried to read, to distract herself, but her mind kept circling back to 8 o'clock, to the abandoned factory, to all the ways this could go wrong. At 7:30, the warehouse began to empty, Adrian's men dispersing to their positions, leaving only a skeleton crew behind. Adrian came upstairs one last time. He'd changed into dark clothing, practical and unremarkable. He looked like death walking, and Lena's heart clenched. "I love you," she said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. Adrian froze. "What?" "I love you. I need you to know that before you go. Whatever happens tonight, I love you." Adrian crossed to her in 3 strides and kissed her with desperate intensity. "I love you too. Have since you shushed me in your library and looked at me like I was just another annoying patron. You terrify me, Lena Whitmore, because you make me want things I have no right to want." "Come back to me," Lena said fiercely. "Fight smart. Come back." "I will, I promise." Then he was gone, and Lena was alone with James and 2 other guards, waiting in agony for news. 8 o'clock came and went. 8:15. 8:30. The silence was excruciating. Lena paced the office, her newly learned awareness making her catalog exits and threats, even though she was supposedly safe. At 8:45, gunfire erupted in the distance, faint but unmistakable. Lena's heart stopped. James was on his radio immediately, barking demands for information. "Shots fired at the meat location. Multiple hostiles. Our people are engaging." "Adrian?" Lena demanded. "Unknown at this time, ma'am." More waiting. More silence, punctuated by distant sounds of violence. Lena thought about the combat training Adrian had given her, the techniques she'd practiced. All of it useless while she sat here safe, and he fought for his life. At 9:15, James's radio crackled. "We have the boss. He's hit but mobile, bringing him in." Lena's world tilted. "Hit? How bad?" "Unknown. ETA 5 minutes." Those 5 minutes felt like hours. When Adrian finally walked through the warehouse doors, Lena flew down the stairs. He was pale, his left arm bloody, but he was alive and walking under his own power. Marco supported him on one side, Dimitri on the other. "I'm fine," Adrian said when he saw Lena's expression. "Just a graze. Looks worse than it is." "You're bleeding." "It happens." But his smile was strained. "You should see the other guys." Marco helped Adrian to a chair while someone brought a first aid kit. Lena pushed past them, her hands shaking as she examined the wound. It was indeed a graze. The bullet had carved a furrow across his bicep, but hadn't lodged in muscle. Still serious, still bleeding, but not life-threatening. "You need a hospital," she said. "I need you to stop panicking and help me patch this up." Adrian's voice was gentle. "I've had worse. Trust me." Lena took a breath, forcing herself into the calm competence she'd learned from training. She cleaned the wound with steady hands, applied pressure to stop the bleeding, and bandaged it with care. Around them, Adrian's men were reporting in. Petrov was dead, his top lieutenants eliminated, the territory dispute definitively settled. "What about our people?" Adrian asked Marco. "Casualties?" "2 injured, none critical. The 3 Petrov took are safe. We recovered them from the factory. They're shaken up, but alive." Adrian nodded, satisfied. "Good. Get them medical attention and compensation for their families. Double the usual." Business concluded, his attention returned to Lena. "See? Told you I'd come back. You got shot." "Just a little bit. His smile was infuriating and beloved. Come on, let's get out of here. I want to go home. Home, Lena realized, meant her apartment. In the weeks they'd been together, Adrian had started keeping clothes there, spending nights wrapped around her, making her small space feel like a sanctuary for both of them. Marco drove them, James following in a second car. In the back seat, Adrian pulled Lena close despite his injury, his good arm wrapped around her shoulders. That was the last of it, he said quietly. The Petrov situation, the territory disputes, everything that made you a target, it's done. Until the next threat, the next rival who wants what you have. Maybe. But I'm working on changing that. Marco's been helping me transition more operations to legitimate businesses. The shipping company is already mostly clean, the real estate holdings. Some of the clubs. Adrian's voice was tired but determined. It'll take time, but eventually I can step back from the worst of it. Lena looked up at him. Would you really do that? Give up the empire? I'd give up anything for you, but I'm realistic. I can't just walk away overnight. I have responsibilities, people who depend on me. What I can do is gradually shift things, build something that doesn't require constant violence to maintain. And in the meantime, I protect what's mine, which includes you. Adrian kissed her temple. You held up well tonight, stayed calm, didn't fall apart. I was terrified, but you didn't let it paralyze you. That's what matters. He paused. Thank you for loving me. I know I'm not an easy man to love. You're the only man I've ever wanted to love. At her apartment, Lena insisted on redressing Adrian's wound properly. He sat shirtless in her bathroom while she worked, his eyes tracking her every movement. You're good at this, he observed. You're a terrible patient. But her hands were gentle, careful not to cause unnecessary pain. When she finished, Adrian pulled her onto his lap, awkwardly, favoring his injured arm. Move in with me. Lena's hand stilled on his shoulders. What? Move in with me. My place is bigger, more secure, and I'm tired of splitting time between two homes. I want to wake up with you every morning. His eyes were vulnerable in a way she'd rarely seen. I know it's fast. I know I'm asking a lot. But Lena, I love you. I want to build a life with you. A real one, not just stolen moments between crises. Lena thought about her small apartment, the sanctuary she'd built over years. Thought about giving it up, stepping fully into Adrian's world. It should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like the natural next step. Okay. Adrian's smile was brilliant. Yeah? Yeah, but I'm keeping the library job and Mrs. Chen gets a bigger raise. Done and done. He kissed her deep and thorough. You won't regret this. I better not. You're very difficult, you know. You shushed me in a library. You knew what you were getting into. They spent the night tangled together, Adrian's injury preventing anything too vigorous, but the intimacy profound nonetheless. In the quiet darkness, Lena listened to his heartbeat and felt the magnitude of her choice settling into her bones. She'd fallen in love with a mafia boss, had chosen to stand beside him instead of running, had learned to fight, to survive, to be visible in a dangerous world. And somehow, impossibly, it felt right. The next 3 months passed in a blur of change. Lena moved into Adrian's penthouse apartment, a stunning space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. She brought her books and her library cat, who immediately claimed Adrian's favorite chair as his own. The literacy program launched to overwhelming response. Within the first month, they had 200 students enrolled, ranging from teenagers to seniors, all eager to improve their reading skills. Lena hired a staff of professional educators, designed a comprehensive curriculum, and watched with pride as lives transformed through the simple power of literacy. Adrian continued his reading lessons, now studying classic literature and poetry with the fervor of someone making up for lost time. He'd recently finished his first Shakespeare play and declared it both brilliant and unnecessarily complicated. Why couldn't he just say what he meant, Adrian complained one Thursday evening, gesturing at the book with frustration. Because then it wouldn't be art, Lena replied, amused. The beauty is in the language, the layers of meaning. The beauty is giving me a headache. But he kept reading, kept learning, kept growing into someone who existed comfortably in both worlds. The businessman and the book lover, the protector and the partner. True to his word, Adrian had begun legitimizing his operations. It was slow, careful work, You couldn't simply walk away from a criminal empire. But progress was happening. The shipping company now handled almost entirely legal cargo. The real estate holdings were being converted into community developments that actually helped neighborhoods instead of exploiting them. There were still aspects of his business that lived in shadows. Still moments when violence was necessary. Still nights when Adrian came home with blood on his hands and ghosts in his eyes. But those nights grew less frequent, and Lena learned to hold him through the aftermath, to be the light that guided him back from darkness. The library flourished under Adrian's backing. They renovated the entire building, new heating system, restored the original fixtures, added computer stations and study rooms. Patron numbers tripled. Program attendance exploded. The library that had been dying when Adrian first walked through its doors was now the heart of the community. City officials who'd once threatened to close it now praised it as a model for urban renewal. What they didn't know, what only Lena and Adrian knew, was that the Mafia Boss who'd once controlled through fear was now changing lives through books. 6 months after the Petrov incident, Adrian proposed. Not with fanfare or public spectacle, but on a quiet Sunday morning in the library. They'd come in early to finalize program budgets, and Adrian had wandered into the poetry section while Lena worked. She found him standing by the shelves, holding the same poetry collection they'd read together during his early lessons. "Remember this?" he asked, showing her the book. "Of course. The poem about loss and memory. You said it made you feel sad." "It still does, but now I understand what it means." Adrian set the book down and took her hands. "I spent most of my life losing things. People I cared about, pieces of myself, any chance at a normal life. I was so focused on survival that I forgot what it felt like to actually live." "Adrian, let me finish. You changed everything, Lena. You saw past the monster everyone else saw and found the person I'd forgotten I could be. You made me want to be better. You made me believe better was possible." He dropped to one knee, pulling a small box from his pocket. "Marry me. Build a life with me. Help me keep becoming the man you deserve." Lena's vision blurred with tears. The ring was perfect, simple and elegant, a sapphire that matched the dress she'd worn to their first real dinner together. "You're already the man I deserve. You always have been." "Is that a yes?" "That's a yes." Adrian slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into his arms, both of them laughing and crying in the quiet of the library where their story had begun. They married 3 months later in a small ceremony at the library. Mrs. Chen cried through the entire thing. Marco served as Adrian's best man, trying and failing to look gruff and unaffected. Lena's mother beamed with pride, having decided that a reformed mafia boss was better than a daughter who hid from life. The guest list was small but meaningful, people from both their worlds learning to coexist. City officials sat beside Adrian's associates. Librarians mixed with legitimate businessmen who'd once been criminals. The community they'd built together, as complicated and imperfect as it was real. During the reception, Adrian pulled Lena onto the dance floor. They swayed together, his arms around her waist, her head on his shoulder, while the city glittered beyond the library's tall windows. "Any regrets?" he murmured. "About what?" "Shushing me that night. If you could go back, would you do it again?" Lena pulled back to look at him. "Every single time. You were being disruptive." Adrian's laugh was full and genuine. "I love you, Mrs. Varelli." "I love you too, even when you're loud in libraries." They danced until late, surrounded by people they loved, in the sanctuary they'd protected together. Outside, the city pulsed with life, dangerous and beautiful and full of possibility. But here, in the library that had brought them together, peace reigned. 1 year later, Lena stood in the newly expanded children's section and watched Adrian read to a group of enraptured kids. He sat in an oversized chair, a picture book in his hands, his voice animated as he brought the story to life. The children hung on every word, completely unaware that the man reading to them had once been the most feared person in the city. After the session ended and the children dispersed, Adrian found Lena watching from the doorway. "What?" he asked, self-conscious. "You're good with them. Natural. They're good listeners, unlike some people I could mention." He pulled her close, his hands resting on her still flat stomach. "Think our kid will be a good listener?" Lena had told him about the pregnancy just that morning. They'd both cried, overwhelmed by the idea of bringing a life into their complicated world. "I think our kid will be perfect and terrifying and probably won't listen to either of us." Just like their mother. "Excuse me? I'm a librarian. I'm all about following rules." "You told a mafia boss to shut up in his own library. Your library. And you needed to be told." Adrian kissed her, soft and sweet. Around them, the library hummed with life, patrons browsing, students studying, people finding refuge in books, and quiet. The sanctuary they'd built together, brick by brick, word by word. Later that evening, after the library closed, they walked through the stacks together. Adrian's hand found Lena's, their fingers lacing together with practiced ease. "Do you ever miss it?" Lena asked. "The old life, the power, the fear, the control." Adrian was quiet for a moment, considering. Sometimes. There was a simplicity to it. Problems were solved with force. Loyalty was maintained through fear. Everything was clear-cut. But that simplicity was also emptiness. I was powerful, but alone. Feared, but unknown. And now? Now I'm happy. Actually genuinely happy for the first time in my life. He stopped walking and turned to face her. "I have you. I have this place. I have the program helping hundreds of people learn to read. I have a baby coming who will probably inherit your defiance and my stubbornness. I have a life that means something beyond just survival. You built that life, all of it. We built it, together." Adrian pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. "You know what the funny thing is? I walked into this library planning to buy it as a front operation, just another piece of real estate to funnel money through. I never expected to find the love of my life enforcing noise rules." Lena laughed. "Best shush of my life." "Best shush of mine, too." They stood there in the quiet of the library, surrounded by thousands of stories, building their own. Outside, the city continued its endless rhythm of chaos and beauty. Inside, in the sanctuary they'd claimed and protected, two people who'd found each other against all odds held tight to the life they'd chosen. Adrian Varelli had walked into the library a mafia boss, powerful, feared, alone. He'd leave it tonight as something infinitely better. A husband, soon-to-be father, community leader, and the man who'd learned that true power wasn't in controlling others through fear. It was in loving someone brave enough to shush you when you deserved it. And Lena Whitmore, who'd spent years making herself invisible, had discovered that being seen by the right person was worth every risk, every danger, every terrifying moment of vulnerability. Together, they'd redefined what power meant. Together, they'd turned a mafia boss's shadow into a library's light. Together, they'd proved that even the most unlikely love stories could have happy endings, as long as you were brave enough to fight for them. The lights dimmed as they locked up for the night, but the library would be here tomorrow, and the day after, and all the days to come. A sanctuary built on courage and love and the quiet revolutionary act of teaching people to read. And sometimes, very occasionally, when the library got too loud, Lena would look at Adrian with that same stern librarian expression that had started everything. He'd smile. She'd smile back. And silence would fall. Not from fear, but from love. The best kind of quiet there was.